We have the presence of a quorum attending on video conference. Notice of this meeting has been posted online for at least 72 hours. On March 16th, 2020, Governor Greg Abbott granted a request by Attorney General Ken Paxton to temporarily suspend a limited number of open meeting laws to the extent necessary to allow telephonic or video conference meetings in response to the coronavirus COVID-19. In accordance with those suspended rules, Fort Bend ISD certifies the following. Although members of the board are not gathered in a central physical location, we do have a quorum in attendance at this meeting by video conference. This meeting is being held by video conference because the convening at one location of a quorum of the governmental body is not appropriate during the COVID-19 public health emergency. Based on current guidance from federal, state, and county authorities concerning large gatherings and social distancing during the COVID-19 public health emergency, there is no established location for an audience to observe the meeting. However, the live meeting is audible and accessible through a YouTube link that was timely and appropriately provided to the public and media as part of the meeting posting, through a news release and via the district website. As we would at any in-person meeting, members of the public who have followed the standard instructions for registering to speak during the public comment portion will be allowed 3 minutes to speak. All other meeting procedures will adhere to the board adopted procedures to the extent practicable. An audio and video recording of this meeting is being made and will be available to the public on the district's website. We will now say the Pledge of Allegiance. I pledge allegiance to the flag of the United States of America and to the republic for which it stands, one nation, under God, indivisible, with liberty and justice for all. Honor the Texas flag. I pledge allegiance to thee, Texas, one state, under God, one and indivisible. Please remain standing for a silent invocation. You may be seated. First on our agenda this evening are recognitions. Ms. Sofer.
Thank you, Mr. President. Dr. Dupree, members of the board, we've got some amazing recognition to share with you this evening. We're going to have some slides pop up on the screen, and I'm going to talk you through those so that we can recognize our amazing students and faculty. Very good. We're going to start with the heart recognitions that we have. We have from Dulles High School, student Ashamni Javari and her advisor Elizabeth Strange, who's an English teacher at Dulles. And then from Travis High School, we have Meha Amarinda Latham and her advisor Lindsay Franco, also an English teacher. And what we'd like to share about this amazing accomplishment is that these students work to design to foster a healthier campus environment. They did a phenomenal job working with the Texas Department of Agriculture, promoting good eating and nutrition, and also awareness of healthy lifestyle. So congratulations to those students.
Ms. Sofer?
Next. Yes, sir?
I'm so sorry. On my end anyway, your voice is breaking up a little bit. Is anyone else hearing that?
Yes.
Is that a little bit better, sir?
Yes, ma'am, that sounds better. Thank you.
Okay, very good. Next, we're going to move on to Elkins High School's Junior Achievement Company. This is the EVO, Elkins' very own. They qualified to participate in the Junior Achievement USA National Championship competition, and we'd like to recognize team members Alyssa Lee, Richard Chan, Megan Konveshka, Duran Kong, and Kayla Owandan. Congratulations to those students. Moving on, Quail Valley Middle School. There we go. We have Charlize Lopez. She's an 8th grade student there at Quail Valley Middle School. She was selected as the Prudential Spirit of Community Awards State Honoree.
Veronica,
Yes,
you do not have a good voice connection. It is still very bad on my end.
Okay, I'm going to try moving on to a different microphone. Is that better, sir?
That's much better. Thank you.
Okay, very good. So we have Charlize Lopez, eighth grade student at Quail Valley Middle School. She was selected for the Prudential Spirit of Community Awards, the state honoree for her volunteerism and her community project, Warm Coats, Warm Hearts. Congratulations to Charlize for her hard work. Next, from Dulles High School, we have 3 students who were finalists in the International Science Engineering Fair. We have got to recognize here in this picture, we have Niall Lakhani, Jainath Pratap, Abaniv Sinha. Our students did a fantastic job in representing Dulles High School. Moving on to Colony Bend Elementary School, we're very proud of our very own Shweta Kare. She was assistant principal again at Colony Bend, and she was named for the Texas Elementary Principals and Supervisors Association's Assistant Principal of the Year. We're very proud of her. Moving on, I'd like to recognize Ms. Bridget Morrison, our Director of Risk Management, and Dr. Julie Guillory, Director of Student Attendance. They were both recognized as the Texas Association of School Business Officials RISE Award recipients. So congratulations to them. They represented Fort Bend ISD very well. Also, some outstanding recognition for the Fort Bend ISD Child Nutrition Department. They were recognized as the Texas Department of Agriculture's Best of the Bunch in the 2019 Texas Department of Agriculture's Farm Fresh Challenge. Good job there. We're going to move on now to some outstanding fine arts recognition. The next few sections here are going to recognize several different categories that we received. Okay. First, we have the Houston Livestock Show and Rodeo Art Show. We have Amaris Shee from Clements High School. This is a colored pencil drawing roped in, and it was crowned the 2020 Reserve Grand Champion. So congratulations, it's outstanding. Next, we have the Texas Art Association. We've got several students. I'm going to call them out by name so they can be recognized. They received a gold seal for the Visual Arts Scholastic event. From Elkins High School, we have Jaden Keisinger. From Dulles High School, Ella Wang. From Clements High School, Grace Andrew. Sarah Chang, also from Clements. Trevor Cheong. Next slide. Let's see. There we go. Grace Gowell. Their amazing art here. We've got on the next slide also from Clements, Sophie Nee. Amber Chi, Vicky Shi, I believe Vicky's on the next slide. You can see her amazing work. Richard Zhang, Selena Zhang, also from Clements High School. Then from Bush High School, we have Brenda Macedo. Brenda's from Bush High School. I think we need to go one more slide over. And from Travis High School, Fiona Chion. I think Fiona's also on the next slide. Okay, and then from the National Scholastic Arts and Writing Awards, we want to recognize the following students who also were designated as gold medalists. From Clements High School, Jessica Ziang. From Clements High School, Nora Romney. Austin High School, Teresa So. There's Teresa. And then from Clements High School, another outstanding fine arts recognition. It's the 2020 Texas Young Masters. It's Michelle's amazing work there. She was one of 15 recipients of the 2020 Young Masters Award. So congratulations to her. And then lastly, we'd like to recognize Kaylee Yu from the Congressional Art Competition, representing the 22nd Congressional District. This is from Austin High School. Kaylee did a good job representing Austin High School, and she won the Congressman Olson's 2020 Congressional Art Competition. So congratulations to all of these fine arts students. They did a great job. Beautiful work. That concludes our report, sir.
Thank you very much. I wanted to remind our audience this evening, if you're not speaking, to please make sure that you are on mute. Next on the agenda is audience items. The board encourages and welcomes comments and input from our patrons, but we cannot respond, deliberate, or decide regarding any subject that is not included on the posted agenda. Please limit your comments to 3 minutes, and please refrain from mentioning a student or employee's name when voicing a concern or complaint, as board policy provides alternative procedures through the grievance process policies GF local or DGBA local to seek resolution to complaints. The superintendent's office, human resources, and administration in general can assist you in finding those procedures online. The following procedures will apply to tonight's audience comments. I will read the name of the person registered to speak and share that they have 3 minutes to make their comments. Prior to speaking, the board's recording secretary, Mr. Gary Rozier, will unmute their phone line. Once the speaker starts his or her comments, Mr. Rozier will announce that they have 30 seconds remaining. And once the 3-minute time limit has expired, and whether or not the speaker has concluded his or her comments, Mr. Rozier will mute their phone line. First this evening is Ms. Britta Merwin. Thank you for being with us this evening, ma'am. You have 3 minutes, and Mr. Rozier will give you a 30 seconds remaining warning.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree and President Burdine and the entire Board of Trustees. I truly appreciate the opportunity to speak with you tonight. Over the last several years, I have had conversations with the majority of you over a variety of issues. I'm very thankful to be a Fort Bend ISD parent where my district engages parents, students, and faculty in important decisions. Thank you for your dedication and hard work. Tonight, I want to address the upcoming school year. I have an incoming 4th grader who is a typical learner and an incoming 1st grader who lives with autism. You will be making many important and hard decisions over the next several weeks that will impact not only my kids, but all the kids at Fort Bend ISD. With limited time to address you, I will focus on elementary and sped ed students. As humans, we learn through imitation and by observing. While building their academic footprint, our youngest learners need social and engaged setting to be successful. This setting can't be accomplished through online learning. Of course, I understand the recent loss in this environment is no one's fault, but it has presented a situation and a set of consequences that we need to navigate our kids through. Kids are resilient, but as more disruptions compound, there does come to be a point where disruptions are not sustainable and the price we are paying is too great. Families that can take on a level of assumed risk that can be lowered by Fort Bend ISD making adjustments to in-person instruction need to be allowed to return to school. With that said, families that cannot assume any risk due to health concerns need support from Fort Bend ISD, and they need to be given the option for online learning to continue. Fort Bend ISD is known for innovation. Seize this opportunity. We need to find a way for families that are comfortable with their kids being in school to have their kids return. Please continue to explore staggered attendance, increased cleaning, and other options to let our kids return to campus. We left school for spring break in early March. That's 11 weeks of online learning. That was very hard. My son has a full IEP, BIP, and AU supplement. He missed 5,775 minutes of in-class support, 2,530 minutes of one-on-one instruction with his resource teacher, and 330 minutes of speech. On top of that, priceless exposure with his peers and academic and behavioral teams. Early education is key for all kids, but especially kids on the spectrum. My son cannot succeed unless he's in the classroom with his teachers surrounded by typical learning classmates. How can a child that struggles with social skills and speech fit the profile of a graduate through online learning? The simple answer is he can't. With 1 in 54 children living with autism, my son is just one of many Fort Bend ISD students facing this reality. In addition to our AU kids, we have many other sped ed kids that are facing a larger gap in educational and social growth compared to their peers due to the pandemic. So what do we do for our students? Each with unique needs, each with unique experiences and consequences from COVID. We step up to the plate. Fort Bend ISD, inspire, equip, imagine. The truth is, a child's elementary school experience is the very thing that launches their trajectory for their entire academic career. It is
Mr. Burdine, Ms. Merwin's time has elapsed.
You're muted, Jason.
Sorry, thank you. Thank you for speaking tonight, Mrs. Merwin. Next is Mrs. Angie Hanan. You will have 3 minutes to speak, and Mr. Rozier will give you a 30-second warning.
Hi, good evening, Board President Burdine, board members, and Dr. Dupree. Can I just get a yes from someone that you can hear me?
Yes, ma'am, we can hear you well.
Thank you very much, Mr. Burdine. I want to thank you for the time you've spent over the last few months making decisions on behalf of our students and community in the face of COVID-19. I really do appreciate the district soliciting input from parents and students. I know those decisions that you've been making aren't easy ones. Tonight, I'd like to present you with a few observations and questions regarding the internal audit process. I believe the audit process is a good way to measure forward growth, and I'm glad to see the audits being posted to the district's website. I also know there have been several programs that have been overlooked in recent years. As indicated on the Fort Bend website, Gibson Consulting was selected to provide the internal audit services for our district. As there is an agenda item tonight that recommends a GT audit along with 3 other non-instructional programs to be audited next year at the cost of just over $453,000, I thought this would be a good time to speak on the topic. I have read the 2018 special ed audit and the 2019 program management audit that was recently presented to the board and was conducted by Gibson. Gibson did not include parent or student input in the special ed audit nor in the program management audit findings. In the 2000 special ed audit, Gibson identified in the report that parents are key stakeholders, and they noted, I quote, "Parents are the primary educators of their children, and they have the legal right to ongoing communication about their students' progress and areas of need. If parents are indeed a key indicator or stakeholder, rather, with the right to communication, I think it is only fitting that this outside consulting firm provide and gather input from parents to gauge program opportunities and communication." I also believe as an auditor who is reviewing an academic program, they must look beyond assessment results, beyond the written curriculum, and beyond board policy to verify implementation. Desktop audits are not enough to verify if student products reflect what the curriculum is intended to deliver. Gibson auditors utilize no student products or artifacts in either of the program evaluations that I mentioned before, nor did they invite any type of student input in relation to satisfaction of learning experiences. So as I close tonight, I would like you to, as a board, please consider in future program audits, like the one coming up in next year for GT, that students are included, parents are included, that the auditors are looking at products that students make, and also look very carefully at the sample sizes of teachers that they're utilizing when they look at lesson plans and do surveys. Thank you so much for your time this evening.
Thank you, Mrs. Hanan. We appreciate your comments this evening. Next is Mr. David James. Mr. James, whenever you're ready, sir.
All right. Well, Mr. Burdine, thank you very much for having me. So this evening, actually, I'd like to invite Dr. Dupree and the remainder of the board to join me in congratulating and wishing and thanking Grail, my bride of 35 years. Happy anniversary, honey.
Thank you.
This is also our second anniversary with you all. For you might remember back in 2015 when Grail was board president, we also had the convergence of our wedding anniversary in board meetings. So to us all, happy second anniversary. And I know, Mr. Burdine, I would be remiss if I did not follow proper protocol and speak to an agenda item. So if I could draw your attention to number 14, you all turn to 14 in your programs. Yes, that's adjournment. And so if I could respectfully request you all to proceed there with expediency, with excellence, would be much appreciated. So anyway, in closing, just a serious thank you for all you do, Dr. Dupree, board, really the whole FBISD family. It's remarkable what you all have accomplished over the last, well, several weeks, months. And reminds me of three words that I like to use when I characterize a very credible and very good team. You collaborate, you adapt, and you deliver with excellence. And you really have done that. So thank you. So back to you, Mr. Burdine.
Thank you, Mr. James. We appreciate your comments. And congratulations to you both and happy anniversary on behalf of Fort Bend ISD. So
Thank you.
good stuff. All right, next on our agenda is 6A1, an update on our response to the COVID-19 pandemic. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. We have got a brief presentation this evening, but it's highly, hold on. Yeah, I'm going to make sure I'm not muted. It's going to be somewhat brief, but it's probably one of the most important updates we've provided recently, because we are getting to the place where the plans for the fall are starting to come together. So the team, we've had a design team working on this for weeks. You've heard us talk about, the near-term planning, midterm planning, and long-term planning. We're in the throes of long-term planning right now as we consider what August 12th, our first day of school, will look like in Fort Bend. Stephanie Williams is going to go over that in a little more detail, but here's the things I want to make sure you board members and any audience members fully appreciate. The most important thing everyone needs to take in along with this report is lots and lots of adaptability and a flexibility. You're going to hear some things tonight that you might be tempted to say, oh, this is great news. But here's the thing, it's still very flexible, because we have yet to hear details from TEA about what their expectations are and how they're going to fund schools. I have it on good report that the commissioner does plan to present details this coming Thursday or Friday about how he plans to fund and what schools should look like, both synchronous in classroom learning and asynchronous learning from home learning. So there is but until we get, so we've got an amazing framework that our team has put together that I'm exceptionally proud of, that does honor much of our community's feedback. But I also want to share, we still have survey results pending and open from our community. So we're operating from what we know today. And I'm going to continue and persistently ask anybody engaging with this topic to remember it's not done until it's done. And we can really expect it to be a fluid situation right up until teachers come back, and probably a little bit to the first day of school, honestly. But the good news is we are willing to put some stakes in the ground to start giving parents some assurance on some key elements, and to let staff have some key milestones that they can hang on to as some of the other pieces still firm up. But I want to again thank our team for their remarkable work to put this together. And I'm going to ask Stephanie to take it from here to go over some key elements for your benefit, and then we'll be happy to take questions and discuss further.
All right, thank you, Dr. Dupree. Good evening, President Burdine and members of the school board. Gary, we'll go to the next slide, please. So just to provide an overview of what you'll see in the fall planning update, we'll talk about possible learning models for the fall, review the design team development process. We'll share the assumptions that we know we're making, a framework, as Dr. Dupree said, for the 2020 Future Forward model. We'll detail implementation supports and the work that goes along with them. We will also align to our core belief and commitments, and we'll end with some next steps. So just emphasizing what Dr. Dupree shared at the beginning, tonight we are sharing a framework. This is a conceptual framework to help our community consider what will occur as school opens. As we think about school opening in August, items like childcare are a point of concern for families. I want to reiterate that this is a conceptual framework, not a promise or a commitment. It's designed to help us understand what will happen. When we think about childcare and that major parent concern, the framework will include face-to-face learning at school, but what we don't know yet is the length of the school day, as that has not been determined. It's our goal to have some students in school for a typical day, and the logistics associated with transportation may become a barrier to achieving that goal. So I hope that you'll keep this in mind as we go throughout our planning protocols and share the information with you. So on our path to conceptualizing the fall learning model, we looked at 3 options. The first option was face-to-face, meaning that students would return to school in a traditional school setting with no restrictions. In option 2, we looked at online learning, meaning that all students would return to school using online learning with adapted expectations. These adapted expectations are what we're calling planned improvements based on the stakeholder feedback that Dr. Dupree mentioned. Items like improving the organization of coursework in school, increasing access to live synchronous instruction for our students, limiting the use of online tools, and including progress monitoring supports for students and parents. And then option 3, our hybrid model, is really a combination of face-to-face and online learning with some restrictions tied to social distancing. What we know about a hybrid model is the amount of face-to-face and online instruction would vary by grade level. Basically, the hybrid model pulls together options 1 and 2 in a number of ways and must include restrictions for social distancing. Next slide, please. When we think about the development process, we want everyone to know the time, as Dr. Dupree mentioned, that the design team and many leaders and also parents, students, and families with feedback have engaged in. There were 4 priority criteria that the design team looked at, with the first being learning equity. Equity is our bottom line in Fort Bend ISD. We want to assure that all students have access to learning and the supports that they need for success. Next, related to health and safety, we commit to attending to the physical health and emotional well-being of our staff and students to ensure a safe environment. And then there's the balance between the models and the impact they might have on childcare needs for our families, and that logistical complexity that I mentioned earlier, which would be required based on the guidelines that are out there. An example of this could be a school bus. If a bus could be used at 50% capacity, it might take a little longer to get our children into the school building. Next, the design team engaged in a rigorous stakeholder feedback model using 3 platforms. First, the Thought Exchange platform, a crowdsourcing platform, engaged parents, students, and teachers around questions related to possible learning models and also calendar options. As you all know, we engaged all stakeholders in a survey, and we're currently looking at that data. And then finally, we had focus groups where we engaged in a synchronous environment with parents, students, and teachers to gather feedback around their input on this work. Next, the design team engaged in research. We've been reviewing on a daily and weekly basis the guidelines that TEA is providing for the launch of school in August. In addition, we're looking at health organization recommendations like the CDC for how safety protocols need to be in place to protect our staff and students. And then we've also worked with a research organization, EAB, which is like a research clearinghouse, to analyze some of the models we're looking at and help us compare them against the 4 priorities that I shared with you. Related to stakeholder feedback, we've heard loud and clear that we need improvements to online learning before the fall. We also need to provide a fully online option for students, as one of our speakers tonight referenced, and also that childcare might be an option for many parents. Next slide, please. So we go back to these learning models. Gary, can you click one more time? As one of our speakers was sharing tonight, flexibility was a big piece that comes to mind when we think about a recommendation that school launch in the fall in a hybrid manner. A hybrid model allows face-to-face and online and helps support our goal of equity for all students. So we do recommend a version of a hybrid model for all grade levels to launch school next year. We also know that we want to provide an option for parents to register and select 100% online learning if they don't feel safe engaging their students back in the classroom. Next slide, please. As we look at the models that we're going to be talking about, the conceptual framework, this is a heavily worded slide, so I'll kind of take you through it. There are some assumptions that we're making. All students will have an equitable access to learning and supports. We recognize that student, staff, health, and well-being must be our priority. That includes appropriate safety protocols, social distancing, and PPE. Social emotional learning will be addressed across all learning models in all grade levels. We know that some families will not feel safe sending students back to school, and even some staff may not feel safe returning to the classroom. We know that students must have access to technology. We believe fine arts, PE, athletics, and other co-curricular and extracurricular activities will be part of all learning models to continue our focus on the development of the whole child. The truth is, unresolved logistics such as transportation, staff availability will impact the model implementation and will require transition and flexibility among the models in the event that a COVID-19 resurgence occurs. Next slide, please. This slide shows the 2020 Future Forward model, which is a conceptual framework that we're looking at in order to share some of those details that Dr. Dupree mentioned earlier tonight. So if you take a look at this visual, it shows that for pre-K through 6th grade, our students will report in person at school Monday through Friday using a form of an adjusted schedule based on the logistics that we've referenced multiple times tonight. We will continue to have an online learning component for these students. That component will be primarily to reinforce instruction, but also to set our students up in the event that we needed to pivot and move into a fully online model based on the health or well-being recommendations in our area. When you look at 7th through 12th grade, there's still a lot that's under development for these grade levels. What we can tell you tonight is that this will be a combined face-to-face and synchronous online learning environment. We're considering right now that instructional impact, the equity that students have some face-to-face time with their teachers. What does health and safety look like as we begin to bring these students back in? And then the logistical concerns that we've talked about before, along with TEA's information that may be coming later this week. I believe Dr. Dupree referenced around the state funding models and other guidelines that they will share. Across all grade levels, we'll offer parents the opportunity to register students for 100% online instruction. We will continue outclass, extracurricular, and co-curricular activities according to the guidelines that are set forth for us. I do want to reiterate that this is a conceptual framework. We hope by sharing this framework, it allows you to begin to get a picture of what the launch of school will look like in August. As we prepare to implement this framework, there are some supports that must be in place. First, related to instructional expectations, whatever the model, we must have strong instructional expectations for teaching and learning for both teachers and students. And
Stephanie, are you on the next slide? We need to advance.
Oh, I'm
the
sorry.
slide.
Yes, sir. Thank you. Thank you, Dr. Dupree. The implementation supports first around instructional expectations. We know that no matter the model, we must have a training plan in place to support our teachers for what instruction will look like. And that begins with the PD plan in the summer and moving throughout the school year. Next, with safety protocols using the guidelines from health organizations, we'll focus on health and wellness for our staff, our students, and any visitors that might be in some of our buildings. Third, the social emotional supports to ensure staff and students are emotionally equipped to engage in the learning environment. And then operational systems like transportation, extended learning, child nutrition to support the logistical pieces of implementing the model. The fifth implementation support deals with staffing assignments and then also decisions that are still forthcoming around the school calendar. Next slide, please. What we want to communicate to you today is that our core beliefs and commitments as an organization remain the same. We believe that all students can reach their full potential. We're committed to the equity pieces that will make that happen for our students. We know that student success is best achieved by effective teachers. We will support our teachers and invest in them so that they can invest in our students. The supportive climate and safe culture will be enhanced by the SEL supports. As always, we will continue leadership development at all levels. And on D, most importantly, we're inviting you, our community, to partner with us in a community of learners to assist with supports that might be needed for our students, our teachers, and our families as we move forward into August. Next slide, please. This final slide really shares the work that lies ahead for us as a district. Now that we have a conceptual framework for how we'll engage students in learning, we have to begin the logistical work around operational systems. We'll implement a strong change in project management plan so that we're ready on August 12th to launch school. As TEA continues to release guidelines, we will vet the model and the framework through those guidelines to ensure alignment. And then as more information comes from TEA, we'll be better positioned to make decisions around the school calendar. And then finally, implementation of the model will require some staffing adjustments, which are being defined as part of that logistical work. I want to thank you for the opportunity to share the framework with you. And at this time, we can open for questions.
Thank you, Mrs. Williams. We appreciate the presentation this evening. Do we have any questions from any board members? I'll take
Mr. Burdine, it might be beneficial for me just to fill in a couple of gaps. Stephanie, I think, laid it out very well. But this is our last board meeting until July 20th. So there's going to be a whole lot of work and email updates going to the board. As I've said several times, if necessary, I would ask you, Mr. President, to maybe even do a called meeting at some point if necessary for board action or just to give a good thorough update. But I do think that what we've laid out tonight presents a framework that will allow us to do a great deal of work between now and the next board meeting. And everyone would feel comfortable that they're informed, including the community, about many of these details. And I would renew the commitment I would express again, because I know for many of our parents, we're seeing that there are a lot of people already, they feel good putting their children back in school. And they want to, but many of them also want to know that we're going to have safeguards in place. So that's going to be where we're going to have to really refine our effort. But I've made the commitment several times that our true goal is to get as many kids, and we heard a speaker speak to this tonight. It's better for many of our kids to be in school full time. It just is. And despite the number that are doing a great job at home with online learning, and many will choose that, we still have many who will do better by far if we have them in school. And so that's why we're really working hard to get systems in place that would allow for that, even if it means we're educating elementary kids in a middle school building and middle school kids in a high school building. They won't, they wouldn't be interspersed with that population, but we may have to use spaces differently than we currently do to accomplish that goal.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. I think we can all appreciate that there's lots of hard work ahead of us, but I do agree that it's likely that sometime between now and the next board meeting, we will likely have to call a special meeting to get an update and or make any necessary decisions so we can properly plan for the fall as information continues to roll out from the TEA, et cetera. So Mrs. Allison Drew is going to have a question or comment for us first this evening, sir. Go ahead, Mrs. Drew.
Thank you, Mr. President. Thank you, Ms. Williams, for that presentation. I know a lot of hard work goes into coming up with that framework. I have more of a question/request. As you guys put together additional information for us, would you be able to, because as I guess as an inherent mathematician, what I hear is we're going from a 1 to maybe 22, a teacher to about 22 students to about 1 to 11 models. And I'd like to hear a little bit more information about if there's going to be a need for additional staff and, budget-wise, what that looks like.
I'll speak to that, Ms. Drew, and I appreciate that question because that, as I've been engaging with other superintendents and the commissioner, that is one of the big topics that's coming up is many of our solutions could cost us a great deal of money. And so that is a piece that we'll absolutely be sharing with the board. And I appreciate the way you framed that because that is you've done the math very well. And it's pretty simple that it adds up very quickly when we start adding teachers. So that's one of the most important things we're going to be doing soon is really getting commitments from teachers, honestly, because we've surveyed teachers, but we're going to have to get commitments from teachers directly about, are they going to be willing to come back and teach in a classroom, or are they going to choose to use leave and those kinds of things to avoid the contact and potential exposure? Because we're definitely concerned about our students, but we're equally concerned about our teachers. And we can't just act like that's not an issue, because many might choose. Some have legitimate health concerns that they can't, and we'll have to engage with them in the appropriate way. But others will still have a fear, even though they may be physically able. And we're going to have to navigate that carefully, because I've said repeatedly, I do not want to lose good staff over this issue. We want to be able to honor staff's needs and requests in that regard. But in the end, you are exactly right. Any shift in how we use staff and any reduction in class size will result in budget increases. So it's very possible we could be back to the board in July, August, or September with potential budget amendments to address these issues. But we will definitely keep you informed each step of the way.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree. I think Ms. Drew. Okay.
I'm back.
All right.
I'm back. Sorry, my audio dropped. I caught most of it, Dr. Dupree. As a additional follow-up, and what I hear as a second follow-up to, as you compile this information, what I hear is this sort of bifurcation at grade 6. And so I'm interested in maybe hearing a little bit more about how you would work with things like, I know in fine arts, things like band, you have students that are in maybe a band where you have 7th graders and 6th graders, and what that would look like, and how we would be, paying attention to those types of things and approaching those types of things.
Very good. We'll absolutely provide that level of detail.
Thank you, Mrs. Drew. Mrs. James.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. And thank you, Mrs. Williams, for excellent presentation and for kind of laying out some framework for us. I appreciate that, and I know the public appreciates it too, because these questions are coming up on a daily basis. What's next? What's next? What's happening? What's happening? So I think that this is a good start, and it gives us some a framework to think about and to consider. I just want, I guess, want to acknowledge a couple of things that I think are important. I appreciate you, all of you and staff, Dr. Dupree, making sure that our core beliefs and commitment statements are not negotiable. Those are things that we hold firmly, and we want to be sure that the community can hold firmly to that as well. So appreciate you acknowledging that as those things being non-negotiable, and that that all children have access to the education that they need and deserve. I'd like to also say that as we think about this, and we are just apply, you've applied a lot of brainstorming, I know, and thought mapping, and really creativity is what it comes down to, and I appreciate that. And I guess that I want to be sure that we value staff's strengths. Maybe in the last few months, we've found that some teachers have done a really great job at the online platform. And there's a way to value that and to leverage that, I guess, where others have been uncomfortable with it. And there's perhaps a way to value that and to leverage that. So I don't know if as these plans develop, if there's opportunity for differentiation amongst the staff, just in the same way that you're differentiating with the students. But I'd just like to throw that out there as possibly an opportunity for staff. We don't want to lose our experienced and valued staff in a short-term change, because the years that we've already invested in them are valuable. And And so I just I want to mention that.
Yeah, I appreciate that, and I would, if you don't, I would interject if you don't mind that
Sure.
the word we are using through every step of this journey is transformation, because but we're not talking about just going back to normal, going back to how things used to be. We're talking about doing things differently in a new way. And you've probably even heard me say that to you before in the boardroom on this topic. But what you just described, Mrs. James, is spot on, because we know we have some of our superstar, virtual teachers that they can serve many, many, many children. And we can then capitalize on the skills of those who are better with the face-to-face and smaller group in that way. It's just going to take us supporting them, developing them, and giving the resources they need and empowering them to do their work. But that's our goal as the leader, and we definitely feel that from the board, that sense of empowerment and that sense of encouragement. This morning, I talked to all the principals just to give them a preview of what we were talking about tonight, so they would not be surprised by it. And I told them we are changing the organization once and for all. This is not just a short-term deal. We're not going backward. And so I think we have learned things, and we're going to learn things during the coming months that are going to make us better and stronger for our students and for our teachers. So I really appreciate that encouragement. The other thing I would add is, as we were preparing the presentation for tonight, I had asked staff to come up with, what are some commitments? What are just a few commitments we can make to our community, to the parents, about how we're going to handle this season and what we're going to do this fall? And they went away to do their work and came back, and Stephanie said, well, we have our core beliefs and commitments. Does this really change? And I said, you are exactly right. And I don't know if that was her original thought or if someone else suggested it to her, but that made me feel proud. And again, I went back when I talked to the principals and other leaders this morning, I reinforced the idea these principles stand true under any circumstance. And so, and you're right, our parents need to be able to hang on to our commitments and the promises we've made today, on a good day and on challenging days. And so we're going to deliver to the best of our ability on our core beliefs and commitments during this season.
Excellent. So thank you, Dr. Dupree, and that's very reassuring, and I appreciate that. And I'll just bring up one other thing that just as a cautionary tale, or just learning from the past. When I first got on this board, we in some of our feeder patterns, we grouped our students in a K through 6 environment. And what the intent was to help those students, but the result was actually that it held them back in some ways. So I just want you to remember that and be mindful of that, and just remember the organizational history that we have taken it's really taken these last 6 or 7 years to overcome. So I'd just like to bring that up and help us to remember, let's not do that again. And let's make sure that we are growing students to their full potential and not holding them back in any way, accidentally, by any kind of reconfigurations that we might do.
I appreciate that insight and that admonishment, because I agree with you. That is something that we think about and reference from time to time. But I do want to assure you, especially anyone who has a history or remembrance of what happened when those decisions were made, we are not talking about putting 6th grade as part of elementary. We're just, they were grouped with those, they were grouped in that way as our kids who need the most significant time at school. But that's not grouping them as a grade level or anything like that. It's just acknowledging, because part of the ongoing conversation, the reason the secondary is still so fluid is because there's other grade levels. We believe a 9th grade would probably benefit as well from being in school all day, every day, because that's a gateway year. But to make that decision would then create other logistical issues. But for the sake of the conversation tonight, please see that slide as simply being, we know that every child in pre-K through 6, it's a critical year for long-term success, and we want them in school all day, every day. It is not a grouping in any way for grade level.
Excellent. Thank you for that clarification. I appreciate that. And then my last comment would be with regard to holding another public meeting or a special meeting to discuss this topic. While I think that memos or information or emails to the board can be useful and helpful, I don't think that that meets everybody's needs. And I do think that having an opportunity for the public to understand the plans as they're being developed and to have periodic check-ins is an important step, not just on the day that the decision needs to be made, but as time goes on. And I know you have used video and other forms of communication to parents, and that's good, but that's not the entire community. And there are community stakeholders that we need to have partner with us over this journey of this next year, whatever that might look like. And so I think the more like a public meeting we can get information out, I think it is to our advantage, and it would be advantageous to our organization. So I'm open to a special meeting if it seems that it's appropriate for discussion of this topic. And that concludes my comments. Thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mrs. Helliger. There you go.
All right, yeah, I was trying to get to the mute. Sorry about it, I'm a little slow. All right, thank you. Thank you all for the presentation. I just wanted to add, I agree with everything everyone said. I just wanted to highlight our ability to support our special needs children. I just wanted to really highlight that. So as we figure out the plan and the good mix of who goes back to campus, you know, I would think that our prioritization will be for those who need the most support in our district, and taking that in consideration. So as we plan for the beginning of the school year, assume that we're going to be asking and validating with parents on who's coming and who's not coming. And with that process, we make a special attention to our students with IEPs in order to ensure that we get them, give them the priority of support, in my opinion, in order for them to ensure that they're successful.
I appreciate that, Ms. Helliger. I would, two things, you brought two things specifically to mind. One being that we are considering how to get a commitment from families sooner than later. I don't think we can wait until the first week of August. I think we're going to perhaps have to do some type of special registration, maybe in late June, early July, probably, to accomplish what you've asked there, to make sure that we know who's planning to come and who we're going to need to serve at home. And frankly, in some cases, we may have to work with a parent to set up special arrangements for their children to come to school to have their services provided, even if they don't want them there full time. Because that is one of our greatest concerns. And as we heard from the parent speaker tonight, that is one of the greatest issues, is our children who require extensive special services. And so your point is well taken, and we're definitely trying to determine how to accomplish that. The other thing I wanted to speak to that you addressed, that it brought to mind, that you've heard us talk about equity, but I want to make sure the board hears that we are not thinking equity, even in a broad brush, that this is a one-size-fits-all addressing even equity, because we may have to implement different systems and different solutions in different feeder patterns and in different schools based on the needs of the children. So when we say equity in this case, we mean truly providing what each student and what each community needs in a unique way. And so we're going to be looking at the data very carefully, working with the student data, the survey data, and trying to make sure that we're deriving solutions that truly address the unique needs of the children in the schools in where they're served.
Okay, thank you. And just one last, I guess, question is that during last at the end of the year, and I apologize if you've given that update, I just don't remember, is that we had certain percentage of our students population that did not engage. And so were we able to contact or engage, at least in their parents, majority, if not all of those students, in order for us to plan for the upcoming school year to ensure that they are engaged in this next phase of this process?
Let's see, Deanna, Dina, Stephanie, do you have a response? Do you know of any follow-up that we've done thus far this summer on that? Or Joe?
Well, I would say that we continue to reach out to parents, and as Stephanie presented in her comments, as we're looking at any online models, we're really looking to get information from our parents so that we know exactly what they need. So we continue to work to reach out to them. We've got several parents engaged, especially with some of our most vulnerable children, with some of our summer schools. So we'll learn from that experience as well. But that's a big part of the logistical work that we'll be doing over the next few weeks so that we can land somewhere that's powerful for our kids in all aspects.
Well, I want to make sure, I definitely understand that. I just want to make sure I'm clear, because my expectation is that we have somehow touched each student who has not been engaged. I mean, we know the kids who are engaged, but anybody that's not engaged, we need to disposition that student. That student either have to have moved, or we have to know what's happening. So we might have to have a task force specifically outlined to just handle that attendance for those students. I mean, I don't want us to be reporting that we have 10% students who are not engaged anymore when then they moved, or whatever the case may be. But if we don't know, we just don't know. So, and the reality of it is because if they were in school the last day that we had school and we have not engaged them, or not that we haven't tried, that they haven't engaged with us. I think that's the better way to say that. If they haven't engaged with us, then we need to understand the why and who those people.
Joe, can you or Sochi provide any insight into that?
Yes, thank you, Dr. Dupree.
Absolutely. I'm sorry. Go ahead, Joe. I'm sorry.
Mrs. Helliger, so even up until the last day of school, we were still attempting to make contact with some of these students. We had a different tiered system that we were utilizing. Obviously, the first tier were having our teachers attempting to communicate with parents. We also had our counselors making some of the contact that was necessary, and we also utilized some of our central office staff to conduct it, to actually make home visits for some of these students. And the home visits were really more of a welfare check, and that was the third tier of the process that we had. And even last week, I personally was communicating with a mother who was trying to resolve the issue that she was having, and it was a technical issue that she was having. So we're still having those conversations. We do maintain a list. Obviously, throughout the summer, there's a lot of movement that occurs, not only within the district, but some of our families leave the district, and then we have families that join our school district. So we're going to continue to do the work that we were doing, and that work's going to continue all the way up until the fall with some of these new families that we have joining us here in Fort Bend ISD.
Yeah, thank you for sharing that. I definitely just don't want anybody to use this as an opportunity to fall by the wayside, for lack of better words, to drop out, especially some of our older teenage children. That's one of my biggest concerns. And so I know that we are trying. We just got to figure out a way to engage. And is there a way, if we're doing home visits, then I guess my expectation would be that number would be extremely low of who we have not been able to engage in. I don't have those numbers. You haven't provided those numbers to me. We can, if you could, that would be helpful. But I would like to see that, those numbers of who we have not had a chance to commit to, or at least to touch and figure that out. Because you're right, some of the students will leave. So, I just don't want to use COVID-19 or this online learning as an excuse for those students not to engage.
Yes.
Absolutely, we all agree. Dr. Rodriguez, is there anything else you would like to add?
Good evening, Ms. Helliger. I just want to say thank you for your interest in expressing the need to re-engage these students or check up on these students. And that was a concern for the Department of Student Affairs. So we used as many folks as we could from the department, including our attendance specialist and our partnership with our Saved by the Bell attendance folks.
Okay.
And for those students that the principal could not contact, we asked for the principals to give us a list of those students. And then we meticulously went through the list and went one by one and sent our attendance specialists out to visit with the student, of course, using PPE, but visit with the family or with the student to ask what we could do to provide them support so that they could re-engage, or if their circumstances needed additional supports, that we also had counselors on hand that could provide wraparound services. So we have hit all of the high schools. We have done, I want to say 90% of the middle schools, and for the elementary schools, our list were not that great. What happened was that most of the parents, when they were contacted many times from the campus, had either moved or did not have working numbers, in which case they sent out staff to just check to see if they were still at those at the houses. So we first started with seniors and went all the way down to our middle school, and elementary school was very few, but we did go to those that the principals really felt like we needed to provide additional support.
Thank you so much for providing that feedback. I mean, that shows that that we will put in the work. I know this takes a lot of work for our staff members to do that. And so I commend you guys and I appreciate that. But it's definitely necessary for us to do that as a district. And so thank you for that update. I appreciate it.
Thank you, Ms. Helliger.
Ms. Hagliger, I have some additional information as well, that when our district sent the survey out to parents to engage with them around challenges they've had and any feedback regarding our plans for next school year as we continue to make those decisions, we did set up a call team, and we reached out and called thousands of parents from feeder patterns that we generally have had a lower response rate to make sure that they did indeed receive the survey and kind of walk them through if they had any questions. And so we've since, the most important thing is to make sure that all of our feeder patterns have been able to share their, feelings on what has worked well this past year and what can we get better at, so we can take all that into consideration as we finalize next year's plan. So we did have a coordinated effort to make sure we called as many parents as possible before the deadline to help guide us in terms of next steps.
Thank you. And so just one last thing, you may need to say that, and I apologize because I normally like to limit my response to 2 things, but I want to make sure that our families and parents know that we talked about this, I think, our last board meeting, is that we were going to engage in a different format than we have during the COVID-19, during the response itself, because this time we've had opportunity to plan. And so the expectation is that the engagement is different. And so our parents should expect that they're going to have different tiers of engagement. It's going to be very similar across the board, meaning versus one side of the district versus another side of the district, that you're going to have that same level of engagement. So, I'm just trying to make sure that we don't hear, well, at X high school, they're doing all these wonderful things, and in this high school here, we're not doing the similar things. So I just want to make sure that it is not only equitable for how we set up the process that we come back to school, but it's equitable in how we are engaging the students as well.
You know, I appreciate that, and that kind of leads to I guess the closing comment I wanted to make, Ms. Helliger, in response to your questions and observations, and that is next year will look very different because everything we're hearing from TEA thus far is that all the compulsory attendance rules will be in place. This will not be a matter of who's engaging, who's not engaging, because students who don't choose to engage at that point, they will be truant, and all the usual processes and systems kick in because the 90% rule, all the normal systems will be in place come the fall, whether they're learning at home or at school. So it is definitely going to change the way that we're going to have to be contacting parents, contacting kids, getting them to school, getting them engaged to make sure that we're honoring all of the rules and laws, not just for the sake of honoring the rules and laws, of course, but because, as you've already observed, if we don't do our job and keep them connected, there's going to be dropout issues and long-term consequences for these children and their families. And so we're definitely committed to getting the systems right this fall to support their full-time participation in school as it should be.
Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Helliger. Mrs. Tossan.
Thank you. I'm going to try to be brief, but I just wanted to piggyback on to that about the students in special ed. I know that we need to make sure that we're supporting them, but we're also going to have some compensatory learning and education that's going to have to take place. So I'm a little concerned how we're going to be able to do that in a way, basically with fidelity, in a way that supports these kids. So I just want to reiterate that whatever we need to do staff-wise, not only to support the kids, but whatever we need to do to support our staff, I want to make sure that we're doing that. We're going to have all of our staff's going to be stretched, but particularly those who are paraprofessionals or co-teachers or who are implementing IEPs, that type of thing. I just want to remember them and ensure that we're supporting them. In addition to that, I don't know how this always happens, but now I'm going to have a 9th grader, so she's going to be in transition year. Hannah always seems to be in wherever these kind of emergencies happen, or when we're rezoning or whatever we're doing. But she's also my gifted kid, and so just like our students in special ed, our gifted kids are identified gifted because they need additional supports, they need additional accommodations. We've talked a lot about project-based learning, and I don't want any teachers to freak out because, I'm not saying that that's what's appropriate in every case, but I think we need to think outside of the box here to make sure that we're engaging those gifted learners as well, especially if we have to do it online. So I know you guys are thinking about all these things. As I'm processing through this, I'm thinking about the range of kids I have in my house and just some of the difficulties that would come up in that. So I really want to make sure that we're supporting our staff, and then, maybe using our curriculum. We talked a lot about, and we have put those modifications and accommodations in Schoology and our curriculum. And so maybe thinking now how that can be expanded to some more at-home or online type of opportunities, I think would be beneficial here. So, so I hope those are things that you guys are the conversations that you guys are having. In addition to that, I know we got in our memo, I didn't really hear it, and maybe I just missed it in the presentation, but we talked about the assumption that our students are going to continue to engage in extracurricular, co-curricular, and out-class type learning. So I don't know if you guys even know what fine arts might look like, or athletics might look like in the fall. I've got one that's supposed to start summer band in just not that long, and theaters starts getting geared up in the summer. So do we have any kind of preliminary plan or thought about what that might look like?
We really do not. The only thing we know at this point is, I think you may recall, is that our athletics folks started their strength and conditioning camp last week. Some began today, but that UIL has permitted that at this point. And they have also allowed us to begin the band camps and those things in July. So there's not been a lot of detail from the organization, because what we found is our band directors are providing a lot of that as those plans come together for the specific students. But UIL is still pending any final decisions or guidance regarding actual marching band competitions and rehearsals. And of course, athletics, volleyball, football, those things. We haven't heard any details yet about what a season could or would look like at this point. I expect that once the commissioner makes his announcements coming later this week, hopefully then we'll start seeing UIL come to bear with more details about their planning.
Well, so that's what I was going to ask. Has any of that been discussed in your daily conversations with TE and Commissioner Moran? I mean, I guess they're not even thinking about. So I would like for our team, I'd like to challenge our team to start thinking about that then. I mean, I don't know what UIL is going to do. I don't know what competition is going to look like, but that is a huge part of education. And the last thing I want is, regardless of whether our students are able to compete, to lose that entire chunk of educating our students in that way. It would be devastating to my kids alone, and I know thousands of other kids around the district. So I assume you guys are having those conversations.
No, you do not need to worry about that. Perhaps you did not see the slide, but it was in the presentation this evening. And Stephanie mentioned that all of the full complement of fine arts, athletics, co-curricular, extracurricular they will be part of our programming. And
Okay.
we'll do our best to not limit them, but UIL will guide some of that in the state. But no, absolutely, we're going to hold, and I told the principals that this morning, because you know as well as I do, sometimes in crisis, the inclination is to pull back on some of those areas. But our direction has been, we will not pull back. Those are vital, as you mentioned, to just the engagement and success and education of our children.
Well, I appreciate that. So I did see the slide, and I just wanted to make sure that it was going
absolutely
to as much attention as. So, and the last question I have, or just confirmation, I guess I want to make here, is that we are planning to keep our start date. Is that correct?
Yes, ma'am. Yes, as of now, and I don't expect that to change. Honestly, it's just we already, because we're a district of innovation, we were already earlier than that later August start. Right. And so a few districts I know are moving very early in August, but we have no intention of doing that.
Okay, thank you. I appreciate all the work that's being done around this. I know it's extremely challenging, and these are just some things I think that we want to make sure stay at the top of the priority list. So thank you guys so much.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. I'd like to echo a lot of my comments and concerns that were made by my fellow board members. Once again, we understand that there's a lot of hard work ahead of us, and we look forward to any updates as they come along. I have one small question as I was looking through the slide, and I hope this isn't getting into the detail too much. I understand this is just a framework that we're working within right now, but what does an adjusted schedule look like for the pre-K through 6th grade?
Well, that's one of the big rocks that we have not been able to set. We do not know yet.
Okay.
The goal that we're shooting for is all of the students in those categories for the regular school day. But it's very possible, based on any restrictions on how we can use buses. For example, if we can't load up a bus completely, or if we have to run students in 2 half-day cycles or something, it may be an adjusted schedule. We're trying to set expectations that it may not be a full school day, but our goal is to get to a full school day if at all possible.
All right, thank you, sir. Once again, we appreciate the presentation. Thank you for all y'all's hard work.
Thank you.
We're going to move along to 6A2, our COVID-19 procurement update, Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. Let's see. Brian, do you want to review that quickly? I know it's not a lot.
Yes, sir. So just as a reminder to the board, back on March 13th, the board did approve a resolution of emergency declaration. And at the time that declaration was made, staff indicated that we would be coming back with a regular report on expenditures made. We reported in April that we made just under $46,000 in expenditures based on that resolution. And in May, we made $572 in expenditures to one of the same vendors that we had made in April. And I'll be happy to answer any questions that the board may have.
Thank you, Mr. Gwynn. Do we have any questions or comments from any board members? All right. Moving along to 6B1, our Gifted and Talented Program 5-year plan update, sir.
Yes, sir. Deanna is going to actually do the formal introduction of this, but I think it's important that I just make a couple of remarks as well, because I've personally engaged over the years with several members, parents who have concerns about our GT programming, as well as many of our students who've written me or communicated with me about their concerns. And GT is one of these programs that several years ago, we began some task force work, we got some planning underway, we made some commitments that frankly, we just have not honored. And I'm disappointed about that, and I'm sorry to have to say that, but that's truth. And, you know, in our boardroom, we try to share honestly with our board and our community with what's going on. But I will tell you at this point, I think Deanna's going to get to this, but just before the pandemic, late February, early March, we had some conversations and got some parent feedback about significant concerns about how things were going. And it looked very different than I understood it was going to be going, as well as Deanna. And so we have since had a couple of phone calls with the task force. I know I've been on one of them, and I know Deanna and Dr. Dina Hill, have had some significant engagement with the task force members. But what I acknowledge to them is we took our eye off the ball. I did not watch carefully. Deanna was not paying close attention, and it just did not go well. And so I regret that deeply. And frankly, it frustrates me and hurts me, because I know we have children counting on us to meet their needs and to serve them better than we have been in this area. And so I just want to let the board know, as we get into this report, this is, you know, we talk often, this is not a sunshine and roses report, because while we have made some limited progress, there is still a great deal of work to do. And I'm glad tonight, though, that we have some parents, members of the task force, as well as some student voice as well. So before I say everything Deanna might want to say, I was going to turn it over to her to go ahead and introduce the report.
Thank you, and good evening, President Burdine, members of the board, and Dr. Dupree. As Dr. Dupree indicated tonight, the administration will be providing an update on the year one progress associated with the implementation of the 5-year Gifted and Talented Plan. The board has consistently communicated the importance of transparency when providing instructional programming updates such as this one. Therefore, in an effort to provide the board a full perspective, as Dr. Dupree indicated, about our progress associated with the GT plan, tonight the board will hear from district leaders, a parent representative from the GT task force, the president of the GT Parent Advisory Committee, and 3 GT students. But prior to launching the presentation, I wanted to acknowledge that although progress has been made to advance the GT plan, we have failed to meet several of the year one goals. Specifically, because of my lack of monitoring and oversight, I wanted to share 3 of the critical milestones that we did not reach. The first is because of, whenever we engage in any sort of change in our organization, it's critical to support our staff in the form of learning. And so in this past year, we had GT training set up for our teachers. However, we failed to communicate with that GT training, and it was not clear. Therefore, the 3 hours that were set aside and planned specifically to provide teachers with an overview of the GT plan and the GT learning plan rollout was not completed by all teachers. So because of that, that impacted also our GT learning plans and the rollout there. The lack of teacher training for that initiative, coupled with poor communication with parents, resulted in an unsuccessful rollout of the GT learning plans, and we did not accomplish the intent and the integrity of what we set out to accomplish with the GT learning plans. Thirdly, because of miscommunication regarding the frequency of the GT task force meetings and the absence again of monitoring systems, this resulted in a lack of progress regarding the expansion of acceleration options beyond the current content-based or CBA options for GT students. So please know, as Dr. Dupree indicated, the district remains committed to addressing the needs of our GT students, and we pledge to do better. We must do better. We have to do better. I do want to acknowledge and thank all of the members of the task force, all of our parents and our students who continue to invest their time and to engage and partner with us as we work towards improving our GT programming. At this time, I would like to hand the presentation over to Dr. Dina Hill. As Dr. Dupree indicated, she has worked with Lori Westfall, our director, over the last several weeks and months to authentically engage with our task force members and our GT PAC so that we can center our efforts and honor our commitments. She's going to provide you some more detail about the GT plan, share some successes, elaborate on some of our areas where we kind of missed the mark and we dropped the ball. So at this time, Dr. Hill, I'm going to hand it over to you so that you can share the plan, introduce our speakers. Are you out there? Yeah.
Okay. All right. Well, thank you. Thank you, Deanna, President Burdine, Board of Trustees, and Dr. Dupree. Thank you for giving us the opportunity tonight to bring you an update on the GT plan. I do want to remind you, just in the interest of time, we did also provide a memo that has more specific metrics and updates on those metrics. And so that can be found in your board with your board documents. I'm not going to get into all the specific metrics tonight because we definitely want to spend time to hear from our parents and our students. Next slide, please, Gary. Okay, so when we think about the 5-year plan for GT, I just want to highlight and remind you of some of the components that we're working on, and this was for year 1. So I'll just start with the Innovation Hour curriculum. And for those of you who may not remember, Innovation Hour is an opportunity for our GT students to spend time with other GT students or their peers on a weekly basis. And we've built curriculum that facilitates the students being able to research and develop projects that are based on their choice and their interests. So the Innovation Hour is, was a big project for us this year, and it's been successful, and we're going to be piloting next year, and I'll talk about that a little bit later. Next is our communication plan, and we definitely, this is an area that we know we still need to work on communications, and it seems like as soon as we roll something out or we do something, we step back and we recognize another learning opportunity to communicate better. Some of the things that we've been working on this year, though, is we've revised our website, and we've created additional resources for parents and teachers, created a Twitter feed. We send a monthly newsletter to our parents, and one of the things that we learned about that monthly newsletter is it was an opt-in newsletter, and we've since changed that so that all parents with students that are identified as GT get a copy of that. And just really trying to stay more connected and communicating with our parents about the 5-year plan, about the board policy related to GT, and all of the administrative guidelines. We feel like that's an area that continues to need work. The GT Crosswalk tool is a walkthrough document that really helps us monitor the fidelity of GT services. And we've been working on that as well, and how we can implement that into the campus support team process as we support campuses on various implementations.
Our GT Parent Series is a monthly event where we include parents and students and families, and we do different kind of opportunities. It's not necessarily a training, but museum night or some other event where parents and students can get engaged. And so we've been working on that this year. Our GT mentorship program, which is for GT seniors, and it's based on an application process. And this is an opportunity for seniors to, to select and conduct an in-depth research project while working with an expert mentor in the field. Our GT learning plans, which Deanna alluded to earlier, are basically, almost an individual plan that students create along with their teachers and parents to develop an academic and effective goal they want to pursue. The Texas Performance Standards Project, which is TPSP, integration in grades 1 through 5 extensions. And if you recall, the TPSP is really a set of performance standards, curriculum, and assessments that helps students, or helps differentiate the instruction and helps students deepen their learning. And so the adding those grade 1 through 5 extensions into the curriculum to further facilitate that. Deanna also mentioned the acceleration work. And so when we talk about acceleration, we're talking about ways that we can provide students the opportunity to move through the content at a pace that meets their needs. Right now, we have credit-based exam as one way that students can accelerate, but we are exploring other opportunities for acceleration. Our secondary curriculum, if you recall, with GT at the secondary level, which you may hear from some of our students tonight, is only available in pre-AP and AP classes. And so we're working on different ways that we can serve students at the secondary level who are identified as GT. When we talk about local norms, we're talking about ways to improve our overall GT identification. And so we have established our local norms, and we're on track with that piece, and we have seen an uptick in our identification at campuses. All right, Gary, next slide, please. So those were the things that we worked on this year. I will talk about some of the glows and then also talk about our grows, or the ways that we need to improve. So our mentorship enrollment program, our mentorship program was amazing. I don't know if any of you had the opportunity to see our virtual our virtual presentations of our GT mentors, our students in our GT mentorship program. It was amazing. And so we had 10 students that were fully engaged in the mentorship program this year, and we're very excited as we move into next year. We have 25 students moving into that program. We've completely revamped the mentorship program, and it's been very successful. And so we're very proud of that, and it's definitely a glow. Our parent series was going well, and we had so much positive feedback about our GT parent series. And of course, you know, in March when we had COVID started, I mean, that put it into that, but we certainly had good experiences out there for our families and our students. And as we go into next year, we're going to have to be creative about how to create these parent series programs if we remain in this type of environment. We talked a little bit earlier about the TPSP integration, and we're on track for that. We have our curriculum work going, and we're doing well in that area, and we'll be ready to roll that out in a pilot series for next year, and our pilot campuses for next year. And again, our local norms, and I noted some of that in with the metrics that you received in the board update. But we have seen an increase in the percentage of students identified at campuses across the district. Okay, let's talk about our grows. So we know we have a lot of grows, and Dr. Dupree and Deanna both identified some of the problems and challenges that we had. And, you know, and I'll just say, I'll be quite honest. I started working with the GT department in January, and I didn't recognize the significance of some of the challenge until I started hearing from some of our parents that are involved with the task force. And they really gave me the perspective of how much work we have to do. And so the GT learning plan was truly an implementation failure. We, you know, we took on too much, and we tried to jump in and implement things without really rolling it out the way it needed to. We did have a lot of learning plans that were created, and but once we started talking to parents and we really started learning more about the creation of the learning plans, we recognized that we really did not spend enough time with our teachers to support them, and I don't think they had a good understanding of the learning plan. We certainly don't want a GT learning plan to be a compliance, to be a document that's filled out by a teacher and put in a drawer and it's never used again the rest of the year. So we've stepped back and we're going to be piloting the GT learning plans next year at certain campuses. And we really want to create these plans with students and parents and for them to be a living, breathing document that we can refer to all year. So we have some work to do in that area. I'm not going to mention the 6-hour GT PD because Deanna talked about that, but certainly we had challenges with communication. We did not get our teachers that teach GT in for the PD and just not having that time with them to talk with them about things going on with the 5-year plan, as well as the work we need to do with the GT learning plan really inhibited progress. The grades 1 through 5 extensions, I want to say that we were pretty much on track with the extensions, or we thought we were, until COVID hit. And so when COVID hit, we decided that we would go ahead, because we'd been working on the curriculum for the grades 1 through 5 extensions all year with the idea of rolling it out next year. So when COVID hit and we tried to roll some of this information out in the online environment, we recognized we had challenges. We recognized some of the challenges. The word extension meant different things to different people, so we didn't really communicate well to parents in that area. We also did not provide enough in that PD for our teachers. We don't want extensions to be more work. We want it to be work that is available for students if they've already mastered the content and they know what's going on. We don't want them to have to go through all that and then get to their extensions. We want them to jump straight to their extensions. And so we have some work to do in that area. And then last, the acceleration plan. I'll be quite honest, I really didn't understand this. I wasn't really involved with the GT. And once we started hearing all the feedback, what we found is that there was a lot of misunderstanding about acceleration. We do have credit-based exams in our district. And so the work that needed to happen this year regarding the acceleration plan didn't occur because our GT department thought that we had a lot of this work already completed. After some follow-up and really understanding from the parents of the task force what this task meant, we recognized that we had a lot of work to do. And so we were not able to roll out the acceleration plan in the upcoming year for 2021. We've had to push it a year, but we definitely understand what we need to do now, and we're collaborating with our task force to get back on track. Okay, so for year 2, Gary, next slide, please. We're going to be piloting the Innovation Hour, and so we're excited about that. I've already mentioned the GT learning plans and the work we're going to be doing there with the pilot. We're going to continue with our communication plan and working to ensure that we do communicate and we really are able. I mean, one of the things we talked about is when a parent is on our website or they're researching Fort Bend and they want to make a determination about whether they're coming to our district or another because of GT, are we really sharing our story? Are we really telling parents where we are and where we're headed? And so that's one of the things that we're working on, as well as just continuing to gather that stakeholder feedback and really make sure that we're rolling up our sleeves and working with parents on GT implementation. One of the things on this slide that I did not, I should have really put the stakeholder feedback with the communication piece. So I do want to talk about stakeholder feedback, and this is really just monitoring and gathering feedback from my stakeholders on what worked well and what didn't work well as we continue to improve. And also, a lot of that has to do with our task force. And I'll talk about that in just a second. I talked about the GT crosswalk tool. Originally, we were going to create a separate document, but now we've integrated that into the campus support team process. And so assuming that we'll get back to school at some point, I'm not sure how yet we're going to do our CST process this year, but GT will be part of that. So as we're out supporting campuses, we'll also be able to look at and learn about GT, the GT implementation. And then our secondary GT curriculum, we're working on that piece with year 2. A lot of that is planning and trying to roll out at the secondary level for next year. Our goal will be to create some courses that will meet the needs of our GT students that are in addition to a pre-AP course. And then what I didn't include on this slide, and I should have, is the acceleration piece. Although we're not implementing an acceleration pilot for this upcoming school year, the work we're doing with acceleration continues, and it'll prepare us to implement for 21-22, as well as the TPSP and the extensions for grades 1 through 5. The work continues, and we are actually piloting the extensions for grades 1 through 5 for next year. Okay, next slide, Gary. All right, so when we talk about the task force, I just wanted to give you a frame of reference, because this task force and the parents involved in this task force have really done great things and really given us a framework and a blueprint for what we should be doing in the area of GT. So this started back, and as you can see with this timeline, back in 2017. And I'm not going to go through all of this, but I just want to highlight that the task force members have been instrumental in creating and giving recommendations to the board about revising policy, the EHBB, as well as working with an outside expert, Dr. Lynette Breedlove, in the area of GT. She came in and really helped as we developed the 5-year plan. And then finally, they were instrumental, the task force, in developing the EHBB procedures. And so some of the work that we are doing right now is just making sure that not only our GT task force, but our campus administrators know and understand EHBB and the administrative procedures, and make sure that we're all aware of the implementation. Next slide, Gary. Okay, so the GT task force this year for 1920, I will say that, you know, we should have been meeting monthly and we weren't. And so that was some of the challenges with really not having a collaborative model. I would say there was research, there was recommendations, and we were informing the task force. And what we've moved into, and I say for 2021, but honestly, after Dr. Dupree talked with me and gave me some of the feedback and the information that our parents of the task force brought to him, I scheduled a meeting with them, and they were very helpful in helping us understand what we need, you know, from their perspective, what we need to do to improve the task force. And so we've already started this collaborative planning. We are working together to create things and to create to implement the 5-year plan. We've revised the way that we're leading our task force to similar to our design team model, so that we're getting feedback from all members. Although we're meeting once a month for our task force, our subcommittees are meeting weekly. We've also revisited the membership to ensure that we have the right folks at the table. And then, as I said, we've had the monthly meetings. Next slide, Gary. So the GT PAC, Deanna mentioned this a little bit earlier, but the Parent Advisory Committee, during the 1920 school year, we did have, we did meet monthly. Some of the challenges that we have with the GT PAC is similar to some of the challenges we've had with the special ed PAC, is really trying to identify the role of that liaison. And so we're working to improve that. We also did not have good representation from campuses, so we're working at improving the representation. But the role of the GT PAC are to not only seek feedback from parents and the community, but then to serve on subcommittees and really help as we work to roll out GT. As we move into next year, again, we want to increase our campus representation, and we have also learned that we need to better facilitate collaboration between the GT task force and the GPAC. So we're working on that, or the GT PAC. So we're working on that as well. So I don't know if that was 10 minutes. I was trying to talk fast, but I'm going to go on and hand this over now to Tammy Marino. And Tammy is one of our parents from the GT Task Force. And Tammy, are you here and ready?
I am here and ready. Thank you. Can you guys hear me okay?
Yes, ma'am.
Okay. So first, I just want to say thank you so much for having parents and students come out and speak to you and give you our perspective on the GT program in Fort Bend ISD. And thank you to Dr. Dupree and Dr. Saavedra for really owning the missteps thus far and their commitment to fixing it going forward. I'm happy to say that I've been an active and engaged member of the GT Task Force since its inception in September 2017. Our first year was largely spent, as Dr. Hill's presentation noted, digging deep into Fort Bend's current GT programs and services and looking at how to improve. We then spent a large chunk of the spring of 2018 looking at and revising local policy and procedures. The task force was then almost dissolved. Fort Bend admin felt our work had been done, even though in fact our work had only just begun. Thanks to many task force representatives and support from our school board, the task force was reinstated. And the following year, 2018-19, we worked on creating an in-depth GT framework, 5-year task maps, and further revisions to GT operating procedures, which were approved in September of 19. Unfortunately, in between 2018 and today, executive leadership over GT changed several times. Dr. Lori Westfall, who is an incredibly valuable addition to the Fort Bend GT team, was essentially handed a laundry list of tasks with very little in the way of personnel or guidance to see the tasks through. And at some point between spring of 19 and fall of 19, it was determined that the task force would meet only quarterly instead of monthly and serve in a primarily review capacity. No one at Fort Bend has yet owned this decision to date, and it did sadly set our work back substantially. To the credit of Fort Bend admin and our school board, when the GT Learning Plan rollout proved to be a bit of a hot mess, I spoke up along with other GT parents and students from the task force and beyond, and we were heard, as is evident by Dr. Hill's efforts towards learning the history and getting the project on track, and by admin and the board's very serious and focused efforts in the realm of GT since, including adding GT metrics to the superintendent evaluation going forward. I feel confident that we are now in very good hands with Dr. Hill. She devoted many hours to meeting with longstanding task force parents and Dr. Westfall to ensure she was well-versed on the history of the task force, where things went awry, which big rocks need immediate attention, and she immediately worked with Dr. Westfall and the task force to reset and hit the ground running despite COVID. Having said all of that, I want to touch base on those things that I feel are much improved today in the world of Fort Bend GT. Number one, with the leadership of Dr. Hill and Dr. Westfall, the task force subcommittees have now been aligned with priorities for the upcoming school year, and subcommittees have district facilitators and deliverables. Please do what you can to keep our executive leadership consistent to ensure we can continue to move the needle on our 5-year plan. Number two, subcommittees have already begun the hard work and progress is being made on many fronts. But there are still some major issues. Number one, we are hitting reset on learning plans, but there still doesn't seem to be any solid communication or education planned around the new learning plan pilot, which is to start this year. Number two, as it's been said, acceleration work is way behind schedule. This is a big deal because our most gifted children are essentially still being given busy work instead of the ability to work at their own pace. We are holding kids down when we should be giving them wings. We essentially lost a year when groundwork and research would have been done to build up to a pilot. Our secondary students, this is number three, our secondary students still only have pre-AP or AP classes as service options. These are not GT services. We still need to look carefully at our GT procedures that say that students who are identified GT who choose to opt out of pre-AP or AP courses lose their GT identification. This is not okay. GT does not necessarily mean high achieving, and GT students should not be penalized if the type of deeper learning they are looking for doesn't come with pre-AP or AP course offerings. The mentorship program is a good one, but there is no option for students who already have a full schedule of core courses that they can't drop and electives that allow them to work on their passions. Number 4, COVID obviously disrupted the school year, but it was painful to see that when GT extensions were added to online lessons, the wording said, once you have finished your assigned work, email your teacher for available extension activities. That's exactly what GT isn't. Extensions may even honestly be the wrong word. They should be billed as GT alternatives, as in a GT student would have the option of doing the assigned lesson or doing the alternative assignment, which one would hope would require deeper or different thinking. Number 5, the GT PAC. We need to really more clearly examine and define the role of the GT PAC, and I believe the executive leadership and representatives on the PAC will need district support to allow parent representatives to communicate back to their campuses and to solicit feedback from their campuses for PAC discussions in a meaningful and consistent way. Currently, PAC reps have no way to communicate with all of the GT parents and teachers at their campuses. Number 6, communication will always be a big rock to me. We have much work to do in Fort Bend in terms of ensuring parents of all races, ethnicities, and socioeconomic statuses know what it means to be GT in Fort Bend. We must do better in communicating that GT is not yet another achievement students must strive for. It is not a feather in one's cap. It is indeed a special need, one that requires truly individualized instruction, as every GT student, just like every student, needs different levels of enrichment, acceleration, flexible grouping and pacing, social and emotional supports, and interventions to thrive and to truly pursue futures beyond what they can imagine. In closing, I know that Fort Bend wants to move the needle. I have confidence that Dr. Westphal is indeed the skilled and knowledgeable leader the GT department has needed, and that with Dr. Hill's executive leadership, we can potentially bring meaningful services and supports to our GT student community. The task force is in a much stronger place today than we were just a few short months ago. The ship is righted, but we will continue to rely on the board and administration support to keep sailing towards our destination, a place where our GT students are encouraged to be the outside of the box thinkers and potential world changers that they are. Thank you.
Thank you so much, Ms. Marino. We appreciate your advocacy. Okay, next slide, Gary. All right. We have our parent, Dr. John Avon, is the president of GPAC, and I hope I pronounced your last name correctly, John.
No, you pronounced it perfectly, and I appreciate that. It's usually a gamble. You never know if it's going to get pronounced correctly or not. I'd like to thank everybody for giving us the opportunity to talk tonight. Yeah, a lot of stuff that I'm going to talk about is going to be, you're going to hear reflections in what Tammy just spoke about, what Dr. Hill spoke about, and kind of the thread around learning plans, communication, and everything. I'm going to stick kind of to this grows, and looking ahead, and I established 3 different points on each one that I want to talk about real quick. First one was when I first came into the PAC, if those who had attended a meeting would have seen that as what could be described as combative. A lot of disagreements, arguments, a lot of very upset parents around the state of what was going on with GT. And in many instances, very rightly so, but things that had evolved and grown over time. Over this last year, I've been able to see the PAC evolve from something that was a lot of, when is this, when is this, when is this, to, well, that hasn't gone away completely, but a lot more open discussions and growth and collaboration between the parents and the district. Specifically around that is we established a few subcommittees. The 2 big points that we identified were on recruitment. So in terms of recruitment of parents into the PAC. The other was into communication, which has already been talked on, but those were the biggest gaps and a lot of them overlapped. So recruitment was highly tied to communication. As Tammy pointed out, the PAC needs a way to better engage with the campuses, direct communication with principals, COGs, and so on, to better be informed and informed both directions what's going on. So that's, so these are things we pointed out. one thing that was really nice, when as soon as we came with some recommendations, Dr. Hill goes, it happened to be at the meeting when we delivered some of these recommendations to Dr. Westfall, and acted on it immediately. The one that came out was when new students were being identified, immediately sent out a flyer in each identification packet saying, hey, there's this GT PAC thing. Let us know if you want to be a member of this. That was probably the number one. Number two on our list of this is what we'd like to see, and it got acted on immediately. That actually grew some trust with the PAC and the school district. Another thing that we were working on, and unfortunately COVID-19 made this also a casualty, was the GT Parent Showcase. In the previous years, the school district had hosted and managed the GT Parent Showcase. This last year, the GT PAC was taking it over, doing the planning, setting up the speaking engagements. And we had that planned for, I believe, mid-May. I think the date was still floating because we had chosen Mother's Day weekend, which was not a good idea. And so we had to move away from that. But everybody was working together, collaborating, coming up with ideas, and everybody was energetic about it. Big swing from the years before. Where's the grows? Well, not to seem repetitive, but the GT plans. I'm so happy to hear that there's going to be a change in how they're approaching these. Those were the biggest gap. I think a lot of parents that were on the PAC had a lot of hopes that were let down, and not homogeneously. It was different school districts had different results. Some responded pretty well, some not so well. And sometimes it even was student to student, the experience that parents were having. The COGS, an area for growth, is better informing the teachers of the role of the COGS and the COGS of the role of the COGS, and having some sort of accountability model where they communicate back to the parents on a regular basis. How a learning plan was filed and everything, or what it was not clearly communicated to a lot of parents. So that could be another area for growth. The biggest thing I think that impacts recruitment is an earlier, more aggressive recruitment process. This last year, recruitment didn't kick off until the school year had effectively started. I think if we start recruiting parents to PAC much earlier, we're going to get more results. Dr. Westfall and I have had some discussions around this, and we'll continue to do so over the summer. Now, seeing how COVID-19 has affected things and it'll affect education, something I think that I would like to see happen looking ahead is how can we incorporate a virtual meeting into the PAC meetings? I think from what I've seen, there could be an issue with the timing of these meetings, and we may get more parents to not only join the PAC, but attend meetings if we were to have a virtual option. For some parents with kids, they just can't possibly come to meetings, so there's no inclusivity there. We need to be a little bit more inclusive and provide options for parents to attend. The other is, even if we do that, we need to have a way of posting not just minutes, but maybe video of this meeting so that other parents that were not able to attend can see the video. I know there'll probably be some process that have to go around for that, if that's even possible, but that's something I'd like for us to be able to discuss a little bit more. And the other point Cami also said, tools for the PAC to be able to reach out to the school district, to the principals, to the COGS. That I'd like to see us get a plan together and a little bit more discussion this summer. Coming into next year, be ready to go. The board sitting with Dr. Westfall, Dr. Hill, and coming up with a plan to do so. My apologies. The third thing is everything that we have been doing in a way I find a little bit more concentrated on what the parents want, less so on what the students want. or the student's need. This comes on to even to the extensions. The idea of extensions and I can reflect exactly what Tammy said. My son treated that, oh, that's extra work. I don't have to do that. He didn't see it as things to help him grow. I'd like for the PAC to be able to work more closely with the task force and the school district to start identifying whether it's extracurricular approaches, external projects, other forms of even mentorship that may become possible beyond the senior or high school level to help grow our students. Bringing in outside experts that may volunteer their time to come and talk to students at certain campuses, things like that, things that are going to provide GT students with something, a peek of where being GT is in the future. Myself, I was GT. If I had been given time to see somebody that was GT talk to me about what are the opportunities in GT, what does it really mean to be GT, probably would have made me think about what it actually meant. With that, I'm gonna finish.
Thank you. Thank you so much, Dr. Avon. I appreciate that. And certainly we appreciate your time this year. I know it's a lot of work to be the president of GPAC, so we appreciate that. So next I'm going to turn it over to Dr. Westfall, and she's going to introduce the students. I would also like to, next slide, Gary. I would also like to just acknowledge Dr. Westfall and the GT team. They have been working hard, and I do believe that we're going to continue to implement the GT services much better as we go forward. So I appreciate all the work you've done, Lori, and let's hear from our students.
Okay, I am very excited to have three, I was thinking two, which is totally wrong, three students with us this evening to talk to you a little bit about their impressions of their GT experience in the district. So with us this evening, we have Sunny Chandrasekhar, Makai Moore, and Milka Puthakari. And what we're going to do, they should have all their cameras on. I got a few little chats just a second ago saying, do we need to turn them on? And I'm like, yes, so that people can see you. So hopefully they will have their cameras on. And we have two questions. We'll kind of go around and have them give some answers to each question. As they do their first question, I've asked them to introduce themselves as far as their grade level and their school. So you'll have that bit of information. So the first question we have for our students today is to just kind of share their experiences during their time in the gifted program. So Sunny, did you want to go first? She's probably trying to find the unmute button.
Okay, is this working?
It is.
Okay, I'm Sunny, and I'm going to be in 7th grade at Fort Settlement Middle School next year, and I'm a GT student. And I don't go to the GT Academy. So some of my experiences through the GT program. In elementary school, I was in a GT class, and there was a slight difference between GT classes and non-GT classes, but it really wasn't anything huge. Like our projects would be kind of more in-depth, and we would have a little bit harder assignments, and GT students were required to do the GT project. Now in middle school, I feel like there really was no difference between GT students and non-GT students. There was more of a difference between pre-AP students and non-pre-AP students. Like an example is that there would be some projects that pre-AP students were required to do, but that was optional for on-level students. And non-GT students could be pre-AP. So that's why there really is no difference. And yeah, that's all.
All right, Makai, how about you?
Hello. Is it working?
It is.
Okay. So I'm a rising sophomore at Travis High School. Currently, I'm part of the communications subcommittee of the GT Task Force, and I was a student at the GT Academy. My experience with the GT Academy, or with GT in general, has, I believe, been shaped mostly by the academy itself, and that it put me inside of an environment where I was able to be next to students that thought like I did And as a result, I was challenged in a way that I had never been before. And I think it greatly changed how my entire life will turn out because of it, just because I was a lot more determined to be my best around people that had a similar passion for things that I did. And I found it very interesting that the academy was quite different from schools that don't really have that same experience. And I think that with GT, it's there could be a lot more done to increase this and to bring this environment, this type of environment, to the whole entire district, I think. So that's my.
How about you, Milka?
Hi, my name is Milka. I just graduated from Elkins High School 2 weeks ago, and I will be attending Texas Tech University this fall. As far as my experience with the GT program, I attended the Quail Valley Middle School Gifted and Talented Academy, and I was one of 10 students in the GT mentorship program this past year. I was able to mentor at the Baylor College of Medicine. Obviously, my experiences as a GT student don't account for the same experiences that GT students that don't get those opportunities have. I was very privileged to have those opportunities of both being in the academy and being in GT mentorship. I really like the confined environment at the academy, as Makai stated before. There was this challenging environment that fostered creativity, and it just cultivated our mindsets in like a way that was always out of the box, I'd say. And then when I got to high school, it was pre-AP or AP classes. And I know both of the student speakers just mentioned that, but I think that's important because I never really felt like I was GT certified in high school. I feel like the importance of that certification kind of just went away as soon as I entered high school, because the academy was this whole different like separation from the actual Quail Valley Middle School. And so I really liked that I was able to be a part of GT mentorship. I know the district implemented some goal settings with GT students this past year, but I feel like even that was a little bit ineffective as far like as my experience at Elkins High School. I met with my GT advisor a couple times, but I know that I hope that that can grow in the coming years. I know that it was new this year, and so I'm excited to see where that will go. Thank you.
All right, and then we have a second question. Share any challenges or recommendations you may have as the GT department considers improvements to the GT program. Sunny, how about you?
Yeah, okay. So like I was saying before, in middle school especially, I felt like there was no difference between GT students and non-GT students. So I really would love to see more opportunities for GT students. And I think that people were talking about that earlier, but I think that would be really great. And another thing, sometimes, like, especially I saw this a lot during the online learning, we would have like GT extensions, like extra things for GT students to do. And honestly, sometimes I wasn't very excited to do those because I had already done the work that I was supposed to do. So I feel like I would appreciate those more if it was like, instead of doing the work that everybody else does, we did work that was slightly different. That was kind of more challenging. Yeah.
All
and
right.
that's basically all.
You're good.
So for me, so one of the reasons why I joined the task force was because the main thing I've noticed throughout my entire time in GT and with the district is that the GT, there's a large disconnect between stakeholders and the actual GT department. And that's based on communication. There's just a big disconnect. Except because I'm already part of the task force, I didn't want to focus on just that topic. So I wanted to narrow in on a different topic, and that's the misconceptions that's caused in Fort Bend. As we expand the GT program, I think a focus that we should have is to keep in mind what GT is. Gifted and talented does not equal success or show how hardworking someone is. And the impression that it is has, I think, put both the GT and non-GT families in confusion about the program and kind of disorder in some way. I think dispelling these kind of misconceptions in the parent and student population, but also within staff inside of the district would allow the program to really grow. Yeah.
All right, Milka?
So I'm really happy that the GT mentorship program was able to expand for this next year. It went from being 10 students to 25. And I think that's really great because I feel like more students, especially GT students, should experience that. And a recommendation that I have for next year or like in the coming years is maybe to create like a cohorted type of environment, like maybe every month or so that GT students can meet, if not like with people at their school, or something that creates this cohort of GT-ness, because I feel like we need to value that certification even when students are in high school. Thank you.
All right. That concludes our questions for our students and our presentation of the folks that we're going to share this evening. So we wanted to open up for any questions that you might have.
Thank you very much. We appreciate it. I want to thank the students and the parents for the presentation this evening. Dr. Dupree, do you think? Go ahead. Good. I'm sorry, go ahead.
Oh, sorry. I just said thanks for having us on. Yep.
You're very welcome. I'm going to go ahead and open this up for questions. Let's see. Who's Mrs. Tossan? Sorry.
Thank you, Mr. Burdine. So I want to start by saying how much I appreciate having the parent and the student perspective presented to us. It truly is a different perspective. We live this in our home, so I definitely appreciate it, and many of the things that were shared we experience as well. I also want to give a shout out to Dr. Dupree and Dr. Hill and Dr. Westfall. I want to thank you first and foremost for owning the problems that we've had in GT. This is not, these issues are not new, unfortunately. I'm one who is extremely disappointed that we didn't have a better year, that we didn't have a stronger year and a stronger showing. But we absolutely cannot get better if we don't acknowledge our shortcomings and be committed to improving as we go forward. I have a lot of experience with Dr. Hill from the special ed side, and so I know how fantastic she is, and that she is a listener, and she definitely gets things done. So I appreciate that part of the parents' presentation, and I think that will that's going to benefit GT going forward. So I, as a trustee and as a parent, was happy to hear that she's going to be helping us as we go forward. I know we have a strong leader in Dr. Westfall, and I think the team could really benefit the GT program. So I look forward to that. I may have a couple of questions, but I really just want to make some comments as a trustee, because from a governance perspective, you know, we set goals. We not only have core beliefs and commitments, and we have the profile of a graduate, but we set goals and priorities, and GT is a priority. And I want to say it, and I want to say it again, and I want to say it again. When I first got on the board, you know, special ed was completely dysfunctional, and frankly, so was GT. I know personally my focus was on special ed because it was so dysfunctional that we were literally losing students. And when you have intellectual disability, you don't get that. You don't get those kids back. But I want to say this, I want to repeat one of the things that Mr. Moore said. And I want to repeat it because I think it's important for us to hear it. It changed how my entire life will turn out. That's what he said. And so if we get it wrong, it also changes how his entire life will turn out and all the other kids in GT. And so I really want us to process that, not just as trustees or as leaders, but as an organization. We cannot afford to get this wrong anymore. So we experienced a lot of the same things in my house with the learning plans and the goals and those types of things. And being from the special ed side, I know what a learning plan is supposed to look like. And we have got to invest in training or somehow communicating with parents what setting a goal looks like, what creating a learning plan looks like. I come from the special ed side. I'm a trustee. My daughter brought the learning plan home. I had no idea what we were supposed to do with it. And when I helped her do it and sent it back to the school, it was sent back to us to tell us that it was wrong. We did it wrong. So, you know, that really is a good example of just a complete breakdown in how this was implemented. I really believe that we should not put these students in a box. The goals can be talent goals, they can be academic goals, they can be social emotional goals, college or career goals, but we've got to allow the GT student to basically think outside the box. We've got to be able to do that, I believe. So I just wanted to say that because, you know, I know we're working through a lot of this and we don't really, you know, we haven't really gotten our footing yet. But I really believe we have to invest in that training for parents. And the communication piece was something else that I wrote down. So I was glad to hear some of the feedback about communication, but I'll just say that as a parent who lived through this, the most important communication piece for me that was lacking is between the teacher and the parent, just locally at our campuses. I was getting a lot of the newsletter stuff. I was getting a lot of that as a GT parent, but I was getting no guidance at the campus level. And I think we have to ensure that we're giving guidance on the specific student at the campus level between teacher and parent and teacher and student. I think if we don't do that, then we're going to have a breakdown no matter what. It can't just be district wide. And I think we know that. I had the same experience with the extensions. I like the idea of not calling them extensions because it sounds like that's added on to. I loved what Sunny had to say about it because I got the same thing from Hannah. I already did my work. This is more work. I don't want to do the more work. I brought this up at a previous board meeting. I had some questions about it. And so I kind of like those ideas. I think we need to make sure that our goals are SMART goals. Dina, I don't know what we're talking about for these learning plans, but if we don't have SMART goals in place, then I don't know how we're measuring them. And I don't know how, you know, how effective they're really going to be. So I hope that's part of the plan.
Yes, and I'll tell you is that as we move this to a pilot and really make it smaller for this next year, just to really understand the in-depth training we need for parents and for our COGs and our teachers, I think that we'll, you know, have some feedback there to help improve that, because again, you're so right. The training and the what we saw was a lot of the same cut and paste plans. And so we certainly want to move away from compliance to a true
Yeah, it's got to be something that the student's interested in, or it's not meaningful and it just does no good, or it's got to be something that's really specific to a student. I mean, that's just like we do an IEP for a SPED student. But, you know, we use our special ed pack to do trainings. And I really think that that's a good way to use the GT pack. and it can be around these types of things, making these goals. I think it's a good thing to consider doing more often. And then maybe you will, like Dr. Avon said, maybe you will get more recruiting and more participation if you get parents interested in showing up for trainings that they need. I'm really glad that we're getting the task force back on track. So I just want to say that as a trustee, I think the collaborative effort is critically important. We didn't have really a task force for special ed, and I think we would have benefited from that. So I think we should really tap into not just the expertise, but the experience that we have. I think that if we don't continue, I mean, we saw what happened. We kind of had like Dr. Dupree said, we sort of had a misstart this year. We didn't get everything done that we wanted to get done. And I really believe it's because we're not utilizing the resources that we have to help. I mean, I think very easily we could have had some feedback that may have helped us not have the misstart that we had. So I was glad to hear that. I heard Dina say that we must do better going forward. And I think as leaders and as the governing body of this district, we have to say that we will. We will do better. We can't try anymore. We have to do it. I don't mind pulling back and piloting things because we've seen in the past that that we have better success when we don't try to go all in. But we absolutely cannot fail to provide what these students need any longer. I very much appreciate all the hard work that's going into this. I very much appreciate hearing from our 3 students. I love their insight is incredible, but I love how students say what they need to say in about this much time, and then they're done. And they say it all. They pack it in just a few words, and they say it all, and it's very impactful. And so I really appreciate them being here. I appreciate all of those who serve on the task force and the PAC. I know how much time that takes. I'm a volunteer trustee, but I'm a parent volunteer and have been for many years, and your service is greatly appreciated. And so the last thing I'm going to say is it changed how my entire life will turn out. So we cannot forget that as we move forward. That's all. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. Tossan. Mrs. James.
Well, thank you. Thank you, Mr. Burdine. And I'll just echo a number of the things that Mrs. Tossan said. I will not repeat it all, but thank you to the students and parents for participating tonight. Mrs. Marino, please send us your list of 7, I think it was 7 things. Please send us your list if you haven't already. And thank you for everyone that's participating in this effort. So I'll just pick up on a couple of things that Mrs. Tossan said. She talked about how we shouldn't be calling things extensions anymore. I agree wholeheartedly with that. So in my experience, and I've known quite a number of students in this boat, when students' needs aren't being met, they become behavior problems, they become dropouts. And we absolutely have to get this right, and it will impact students' lives. I've seen some of students fight back and attend summer graduation or drop out and get their GED or other alternative paths like that. But that's not what I want Fort Bend ISD to be about. I really want us to get this right, as Mrs. Tossan said. I also think that at the elementary through high school level, students are acting out and exhibiting bad behaviors, and exhibiting disruptive behavior and causing disruption in classrooms because they are not engaged and their learning needs are not being met. So let's think about alternative assignments. Let's think about acceleration. Let's work on the acceleration plan I heard you talking about. And let's not have these be compliance exercises. Some of these GT projects, for example, I'm going to bring this up particularly. The GT projects, they could be really good if they were alternative assignments, if they were based around something that a student really wanted to do or explore, sort of as Milka talked about how her mentorship program was. That was a class and that was a project, and it was interesting to her, and she was able to develop that project and make it something that was fantastic. When these projects are tacked on in May for students to do by a deadline as a compliance exercise, it's not effective for anybody. It becomes a fight. And it becomes a fight in the home, and it becomes a fight with the teacher, and it becomes a miserable situation, to which students respond, I don't want to be in GT anymore. And that is not good. That is not good. So I know you guys are working on this, but I just want to reiterate those things that I didn't hear said already tonight. I will also reiterate something Mrs. Tossan said. I believe staff is saying this as well. The professional development needs to be done with fidelity so that implementation of these pilot programs and our plans can be done with fidelity. I heard some stories about professional development that caused me to call Dr. Dupree. So I know that even teachers were asking questions about what was happening. So I encourage you guys to continue to rework that and to get that done in a way that gives the staff the tools that they need to help the students, such as the ones that we have on this call tonight. The last topic I'll say one other thing. I heard Mrs. Tossan also talk about how we've set goals. We've identified gifted and talent as a priority. It's in our strategic milestones. We've written policy about it. We've been very specific and had multiple conversations in the boardroom. So we just need to get some stuff over the finish line. And I'd like to just say that that's really important. One thing that I've not heard mentioned tonight, and I do want to ask about it, will student identification continue in the 2020-2021 school year? Are we planning to continue with gifted and talent identification next year?
Dr. Westfall, do you want to answer that, how we're managing within the COVID times?
Yes. Identification will take place in the 2021 school year. We have some different options. In fact, Riverside, which is the company that provides our COGAT, they actually right now are working on offering an online version as well. It's not ready yet, but they're working on that. If that doesn't happen, our department is talking through some different ways with testing that we would be able to do that depending on the model that choose going back to school. It just might take us a little bit longer depending on what model is there, but absolutely will continue.
Okay, thank you for that. I'm glad to hear that. One of the things that's on my mind, again, with regard to identification, and this is in our policy, but I'll just mention it because I didn't hear it mentioned tonight. I'd like to see identification happening at all campuses and in all demographics. I see these students on tonight. We talk about, Dr. Avon was mentioning how we are struggling to get some parent participation at different campuses. I don't know what the percentages of that are, but I know historically we've not been identifying gifted and talented students at all campuses. I asked a question about this through email over the weekend because some of the metrics that I saw were talking about getting identification levels from 4% to 5%. And that's interesting, but that's not a priority for me. Getting from 0% to 3% would be much more of interest to me. Do we have any metrics? Are we putting any effort in around getting some of our campuses where we have under identification? How are we addressing that issue?
Dr. Westphal, do you want to take that one? I know we talked about this. I think you have a little bit more information.
We do. The metric itself, and what you brought up is actually an excellent point, just because that's something that we discussed as well when that metric was designed. In order to create that metric, what we were actually looking for was growth. And originally the metric was written as a percent, right? The percent of campuses that are at the 5%. The 5% is what TEA determines as being statistically what your gifted population should be in every campus. That being said, when I went through and pulled all of that data, it might be better, and this would be something I would need to talk about with Dr. Hill as well, but it might be better for us to actually determine campuses that are making improvement. Because you're right, we had some campuses that went from 1 student identified to 9, but unfortunately that 9 still was not at the 4.5 or still was not at the 5, so it reflected that. So that's a good point. I had proposed that we change to an actual number, right? The number of campuses so that we could look, but maybe, I don't know whether it needs to be a different metric or whether we can change that metric, but you're right, it would tell us much more of a story to see that progress is being made. So I don't know the answer per se, but that's something that I ran across as well. And I don't know that the numbers really tell it. We have the numbers, but I don't know that the numbers that are presented in that metric tell us what you're asking for, which is progress. And that might be something for us to look at as well.
Excellent. And thank you, Dr. Westphal, for that answer. And thanks for considering, for your consideration.
Absolutely.
I guess my point in speaking up tonight is that I wish to be an advocate for those students and those young people in our system that do not have someone at home speaking up for them. And it's, as I said before, when students' needs are not being met in the classroom, they become behavior problems, they become disengaged and move on to something else. And sometimes that means dropping out. And we know that's not a good success story for a student, and particularly for a gifted student. So I'd just like to, I'd like for us to look at making sure we're inclusive for all campuses and all demographics, and making sure that we are looking at how our identification compares with the demographics at a particular campus or in a particular feeder pattern or whatever might be appropriate. But I appreciate your consideration looking at that. I think that concludes my comments and questions, and I really appreciate this report. I've really enjoyed having the parents and the students present, and I hope that we'll make it an annual event. And I will also say that I did enjoy the online GT mentorship virtual presentation, I guess. Normally, you know, we've done it in person and been able to interact with the students. We didn't get to interact this time, but I appreciated being able to view the programs and all the hard work that these students had completed. And you got to see their personalities in their presentations, and that was really, really enjoyable. So thank you for providing us and allowing that, and making that work. So thank you very much.
Thank you, Mrs. James. Mr. Rosenthal.
Thank you. I don't want to take too long. I don't think I could say things too much better or any better than my previous colleagues. I do want to say that I think this has been one of the most open, honest discussions that we've had in a while. And this is exactly what I was hoping for a year ago when we were talking about the policy, when I had stated that I wanted to see feedback in the boardroom from parents. And I'm glad you brought in students too, because that made it even better. So thank you all for participating. Thank you to Dr. Dupree for encouraging that. I think it's been just a great discussion. I think I can't speak for everyone else, but I think we've all learned and really heard firsthand what is actually happening. It's one thing to read memos, but I think to hear it in person just makes it hit home so much more. So just a couple of the takeaways. One, it sounds like there's a lot more positive communication happening between the two advocacy groups and the administration. So that is a good thing. And I think that I also, the comment about changing the word from extensions to alternatives or some other word, I think would have good connotations. We used to use that word, when I taught, and it didn't necessarily mean GT. It kind of meant more work. The other thing is both Grail and Kristen talked about is training and professional development. This is not easy stuff. Okay, when I taught my year, I had zero training in GT. I kind of had to figure some of it out on my own, and I saw these kids thinking in really different ways. I was like, oh, that must be GT, and so that's how I learned it. But it's a whole different ballgame between just kind of learning to observe it and actually being able to promulgate it, provide for more of it taking place in your classroom. So I think that's where that training and professional development is just absolutely critical. Because again, we're asking teachers to do more. And so we have to provide the training to make it as easy as possible. We have to provide the resources because this is important. And without that, it just becomes another burden and it won't happen. The exchange, the ideas, the learning at the GT level just will not happen. So I think that's all I had, and I appreciate everyone's comments. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Mrs. Allison Drew, did you have a question or comment?
Hi, I have a comment. I think that that my questions were answered, and I am actually going to keep it brief as well. I want to definitely thank staff and the parents and the students for giving this presentation. This is a subject that is truly near and dear to my heart. I was identified as GT in the 2nd grade, and like Makai said, it really changed my world. There's a lot that a GT student, math, and I think Ms. Marino mentioned, social emotional things that are the support that's needed. I mean, I masked medical issues. No one knew that I needed glasses because I could memorize anything on a board. I mean, there are just so many things that being identified opened up for me. And as some of the students said, what was really important in my development was that I found, people that were like me. And I was in an environment where they supported students like me. Because as Ms. James said, not that I was ever a terrible student or bad in any way, but I would do things like stare out the window so that I could get called on. So there are just so many things that being able to be identified and supported that really kind of shapes that student and really, brings us to not being that student that blended in, because that's what I was, and really pushes you to your limits and really grows you in ways that, that you cannot imagine. So I was really hoping that Sunny, Makai, and Milko are on, we're still on camera at this point, but, I wanted to let them know, see, they could end up being board members like me as well. So thank you guys for putting together this presentation and for all that you do and for owning, your one to grow on. I really appreciate it.
Thank you, Mrs. Drew. Wrapping this all up, there's something that Mr. Rosenthal said that I thought is key to all of this. I've had experience in the classroom. I've had very limited experience in the classroom, but I can appreciate the challenges that each teacher faces. Professional development is key to us getting this right. Once again, we want to thank the students, Dr. Westfall, Mr. Avon, Mrs. Marino, Dr. Hill, and Mrs. Tossan, and all the students once again said something very powerful, and that was, we will do better. With that being said, we will now convene in closed session under the Texas Open Meeting Act, Texas Government Code, Chapter 551, under the following sections for the purpose of a private consultation with the board's attorney on any or all subject matters authorized by law. We are now convened in closed session. Mr. Rice.
Mr. President, I move that the Board of Trustees delegate authority to the superintendent to appoint and approve employment contracts for campus principals, directors, and executive directors for the 2020-2021 school year, and further move to end the delegation on August 31st, 2020.
May I have a second?
Second.
I have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. James. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, I will now call the roll so that each member can state his or her vote on this item. Mrs. Drew, please vote yea or nay.
I vote yay.
Mrs. Helliger.
Yay.
Mrs. James.
Yay.
Mr. Rice.
Yay.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Yay.
Mrs. Tossan.
Yay.
This is Jason Burdine. I also vote yay. Motion passes. Mrs. Helliger.
I'm doing this one. Grill.
Okay. I'm sorry, I have it marked wrong. Go ahead, Mrs. James.
That's okay. I move that the Board of Trustees approve Dr. Jerry Brett Lemley to the position of Assistant Superintendent of Secondary Schools.
Jim Rice seconds.
We have a motion by Mrs. James and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, let's please vote by roll call. Yay or nay. Mrs. Drew.
I vote yay.
Mrs. Helliger.
Yay.
Mrs. James.
Yay.
Mr. Rice.
Yay.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Yay.
Mrs. Tossan.
Yay.
This is Jason Burdine. I also vote yay. Motion passes. Our next motion, Mrs. James, do you have this one as well?
Yes, sir.
All right, go for it.
Mr. Burdine, I move that the Board of Trustees approve Brenda Essenberg to the position of Executive Director of Business Services.
Jim Rice seconds.
We have a motion by Mrs. James and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, I'm going to call roll and each member can state yay or nay. Mrs. Drew.
Yay.
Mrs. Helliger.
Yay.
Mrs. James.
Yay.
Mr. Rice.
Yay.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Yay.
Mrs. Tossan.
Yay.
This is Jason Burdine. I also vote yay. Motion passes. Mrs. Drew.
I move that the Board of Trustees approve LaShonda Wall to the position of Director of Benefits and Wellness.
Jim Rice seconds.
We have a motion by Mrs. Drew and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, please vote by roll call. Mrs. Drew.
Yay.
Mrs. Helliger.
Yay.
Mrs. James.
Yay.
Mr. Rice.
Yay.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Yay.
Mrs. Tossan.
Yay.
This is Jason Burdine. I also vote yay. Motion passes. Next on our agenda this evening are our board member reports. Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, sir. It was another busy month. We had our regular business meeting, special call meeting for cybersecurity training, very informative, special event with Compassion Coach Laura Jack, Project Search graduation ceremony, Fort Bend ISD Class of 2020 graduation ceremonies, which were, of course, very successful, once again, to all the hard work put forth by Veronica and her team. Called meeting and agenda review, public budget hearing, student leadership end of year breakfast, Lakeview celebration drive-by parade, Fort Bend ISD, a close-up outlook with Dr. Charles Dupree, community distribution drive for Fort Bend County community, House of Representatives Gary Gates, HD 28, Kempner High School senior parade, Go Public Gulf Coast Steering Committee meeting, Vision and Planning Committee meeting, SHAC Committee meeting, and Policy Committee meeting. That is all.
Thank you, Mr. Rosenthal. Next, 10B special reports. Mrs. Grail James, our Board Policy Committee Chairperson, will present the 2019-20 Board Policy Committee update. Mrs.
Thank
James.
you. Thank you, Mr. Bodine, and Mr. Rozier is putting the slides up. First, next slide, please, Mr. Rozier. This is just a quick overview to let you know what the policy committee did over the past year. We were very, very busy. As you know, we live by the motto in Fort Bend ISD that if it isn't in policy, it doesn't exist. And I'd like to add a corollary to that, and that is, if it isn't in policy, it won't last. So through the board self-evaluation last year, we identified quite a number of policies to review, and we prioritized those with administration. We met monthly. All the policies were reviewed kind of in a draft format and then in more detail a second time. And we had quite a thorough process. I was pleased to serve on the policy committee with Mrs. Allison Drew and Mr. Dave Rosenthal. Dave and I have been doing this for quite some time, but we were really glad to add Allison to the mix this year. And she provided some valuable fresh eyes to our policy manual. We also were well represented by various staff members as appropriate to the policy we were working on. Next slide, please. We had a really good system that we set up, prioritizing the policies, and all the ones that are highlighted in yellow there are ones that were board priorities. And you can see there are a lot of them. And this document, I'm only showing you the first page, but it was actually 3 pages long. And so this constituted quite a bit of work. We had a good system though, and Dr. Indelicato helped us to get the system set up, and we're going to continue using it this next year. Next slide, please. I asked him to put this in because when we finished a policy, we turned this line on our spreadsheet green. And in the end, we accomplished quite a bit of work, and we were able to turn a good part of our spreadsheet green. Next slide, please. See, there's page 2. There's a few lingering things. You'll notice at the bottom there, the CQ policies have little asterisks by them. That's because they've been board priorities now for over a year. But we did our training last month, and staff is working on some first drafts of those, and we hope to have those to the board in the early fall. Next slide, please. We were able to complete 19 policies through the policy committee, which was quite a lot. 6 came to the board, but those had not gone for compliance reasons. Those had not gone through the policy committee, but that's our work through May. Next slide, please. We were able to get 14 of the 19 policies that we approved this year were board priorities, and we've slated the remaining board priorities for the fall, as I previously mentioned. So that's pretty good batting average. The remaining board priorities are some on accountability, and this is having to do with just our refocus of our accountability system, the cybersecurity policies that we've previously mentioned, and DMA, which is professional development and staff development. And that one had come up as a priority, It was identified also in the academic management audit as needing revision, and it came up again this year in our board self-evaluation. So that's a pretty high one to get working on. Policies are also identified by administration, particularly when they start to get really out of whack with what we're actually doing. There are some old policies hanging around there, and so we're trying to get that cleaned up. We have, with the legislative session, there are quite a number of policies that need to be updated to remain in compliance. We have not received all of the guidance from the TEA related to those policies. And so not all of our, and we are not a, well, we're thoughtful about how we take a look at these. So we'll be working on some of those in the fall as well. Next slide, please. So this is what our schedule actually looks like. And that's our spreadsheet that we'll be working from in the fall. And as you can see, our priority policies are on the first page. So that's a good sign. It's a pretty aggressive schedule, I will say, though, because we have 3 for September and 3 in October. And with starting school in a potentially different way, we may have to delay a little bit of this work if administrative staff doesn't have the bandwidth to support all the efforts. Next slide, please. Oh, that's the end of the slides. So really, the focus of our policy committee has been to focus on improved governance, making sure the work that the board wants to do gets embedded in our policies, that we fill gaps in governance when staff is needing direction, or when there is a large effort by staff going on in a particular area. We've tackled those policies so that the administration has clear direction on how to go forward. And I think it's been a very successful model. We've focused less on compliance exercises and more on improved governance. And so I'm proud of the work that the policy committee has done. It's sometimes very detailed and very tedious. I thrive in that environment, but I know not everybody does. And so I appreciate fellow trustees who've committed to helping with this work. And I'm happy to answer any questions if anybody has anything. And I also would invite Dave or Allison to comment if they have anything that they'd like to add to our report.
I'm going to get to you just one second, Mr. Rice. Dave or Allison, do you have any comments?
I think Grail took care of everything.
Thank you. Go ahead, Mr. Rice.
I would simply like to thank Mrs. James, Mr. Rosenthal, and Mrs. Drew for their work on these policies. In particular, the priority policies. I doubt that any board in the 61-year history of Fort Bend ISD has written as many priority policies. And I will not forget, these priority policies guided Deanna Saavedra and Stephanie Williams in getting our curriculum in alignment with our profile of a graduate, our mission and vision, and our profile of a graduate. And I consider that one of the supreme accomplishments that I have had the privilege to participate in as part of the team of 8, even though I didn't write any of that policy itself. And you're right, Mrs. James, that's your cup of tea. It's not mine. But I am very glad that you and Mr. Rosenthal and Mrs. Drew have dedicated yourself to completing these types of policies, and in particular, the priority policies. It's really outstanding work. Thank you.
Thank you, Mr. Wright. Mrs. James. Mrs. Drew. Allison.
I'm sorry, I'm not hearing you very well. Are you saying something to me, Jason?
Did you have any comments?
I think Grail said it all for the team. You know, I enjoy my time on the policy committee. You know, I enjoy kind of going along with the thought processes and understanding what all goes into making policy and how important it is and how well thought out both Mrs. James and Mr. Rosenthal are about everything that we put into policy and how it ties back to the profile of a graduate and ultimately what we want to do as a board. So, you know, as the new member taking her maiden voyage on this policy writing track, I really appreciate the sort of tutelage that they've given me and the insight that they provide. So.
Thank you, Mrs. Drew. Thank you, Mrs. James, and thank you, Mr. Rosenthal, for your hard work on the policy committee. We appreciate you, and thanks for the report, Mrs. James, and the presentation. Moving along to our consent agenda. Do we have any items board members want to pull from the consent agenda this evening? All right, with that being said, may I have a motion on the consent agenda?
President Burdine, Jim Rice moves to approve the entire consent agenda as presented.
Second, this is Grail James, I second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. Grail James. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, please vote by roll call. Mrs. Drew.
Yay.
Mrs. Helliger.
Yay.
Mrs. James.
Yay.
Mr. Rice.
Yay.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Yay.
Mrs. Tolson.
Yay.
Jason Burdine also votes yay. This motion passes. Moving along to our action item this evening. We have 3 action items this evening. Mr. Rice.
Mr. Burdine, I move that the Board of Trustees approve the 2020-21 budget and tax rate for the general fund, the debt service fund, and the child nutrition fund as presented.
You have a second?
Second.
We have a motion by Mr. Rice and a second by Mrs. James. We're going to now vote by roll call. Mrs. Drew.
Yay.
I'm sorry,
Do we have any discussion?
I was just about to say, I apologize about that. Do we have any discussion on this item about the budget and tax rate for the general fund, debt service fund, and child nutrition fund? Is there any discussion? Hearing none, we will now vote. I'm sorry about that. We'll now vote by roll call. Mrs. Drew.
Yay.
Mrs. Helliger.
Yay.
Mrs. James.
Yay.
Mr. Rice.
Yay.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Yay.
Mrs. Tolson.
Yay.
This is Jason Burdine. I also vote yay. Motion passes. Mrs. Helliger.
Yes. Thank you. I move that we approve of a resolution delegating authority to Dr. Dupree to submit waivers to the Texas Education Agency in response to the COVID-19 public health emergency closure.
Jim Rice seconds.
We have a motion by Mrs. Helliger and a second by Mr. Rice to delegate authority to the superintendent to submit all necessary waivers related to the COVID-19 pandemic for the 2021 school year. Do we have any discussion? Hearing none, we will now vote. Mrs. Drew.
Yay.
Mrs. Helliger.
Yay.
Mrs. James.
Yay.
Mr. Rice.
Yay.
Mr. Rosenthal.
Yay.
Mrs. Tolson.
Yay.
And Jason Burdine also votes yay. Motion passes. Our last action item, Mr. Rosenthal.
Yes, I move that the board approves appointing Atusa Safa as a member of the School Boundary Oversight Committee, representing the high school parent position for the Clements High School feeder pattern.
Jim Rice seconds.
We have a motion by Mr. Rosenthal and a second by Mr. Rice. Do we have discussion? Hearing none, we will now vote. Mrs. Drew,
Yay.
Mrs. Helliger,
Yay.
Mrs. James,
Yay.
Mr. Rice,
Yay.
Mr. Rosenthal,
Yay.
Mrs. Tossan,
Yay.
Jason Burdine also votes yay. Motion passes. We will now review future board meeting agenda items. Dr. Dupree.
Yes, sir. It's very brief. We will have one meeting in July, on July the 20th. We will hear an internal audit report on the facilities audit follow-up from Gibson. We will also provide another COVID-19 update. I also noted that this shows that in August, the board will consider approval of the student code of conduct, but that will actually be on the July agenda in anticipation of starting school in August. In August, we'll be looking at the CTE as well as the counseling, the vision and college and career readiness update, and then approving delegates for the Tacit TASB conference, along with a few other routine items.
Thank you, Dr. Dupree.
Can I have Jason, can I make a comment on that?
Please, sir.
Charles, I've actually been meaning to ask you this for a while now, but in your CTE update, could you give us a kind of a recent update on how COVID has affected those students as well? Because we haven't really heard a whole lot about that.
Absolutely. Meredith is actually putting together a written update that should be in this week's board update.
Great.
But we will also be able to address it more detailed in the presentation. So we will do that.
I have a question as well. This would maybe be related to the COVID-19 update, but I found out through family trivia this weekend that 44 million people watched the League of Legends World Series on live television the last time it was played, which made me think about esports and gaming and that as a activity or a competitive environment. I wondered if that's a thing we should think about or consider, especially if we're doing some virtual school, and this might be a club or a competitive activity, because apparently it goes on worldwide. So
It
thought I'd throw
does.
that out there.
I appreciate that. Thank you.
Thank you, Mrs. James. May I have a motion to adjourn?
I move that we adjourn.
Second.
This meeting is now adjourned.
Hey.